Morning. Welcome to June Bessie. I'd like to call the Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee to order, please. We'll get a roll call.
Dr. Bofi.
Here.
Mr. Castillo.
Here.
Dr. Davis.
Here.
Ms. Ellis.
Here.
Mr. Garvey.
Here.
Ms. Holloway.
Here.
Mr. Mellerman. Mr. Morris.
Here.
Ms. Orange-Jones. Mr. Ross.
Here.
Ms. Boucher.
Here.
Ms. Rocco.
We got a quorum. Thank you. First item, please.
Your consent agenda is ready for approval, adding items 6.2 and 6.3.
Can I get a motion? Mr. Ross? Second. Dr. Davis, thank you. Do you have any comments? Comments? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please. All right, I'd like to take a point of personal privilege here and offer congratulations to the Mellerin family. I'll be sitting in for Mr. Mellerin's chair position on this committee this morning. Michael and Stacy are at home in Shreveport, welcoming Camille and Ella to Louisiana. So congratulations to the Mellerin family. Next item. I'd like to see if I could get a motion to take item 8.1 out of order and move item 3.1 to the end of the agenda. Mr. Garvey, Ms. Davis, Dr. Davis, second. Any opposition? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
Your first item will be on page 111, item 8.1, consideration of an update report regarding student attendance rates. Recommendation is to receive the report.
Get a motion. Dr. Bofi, second. Ms. Holloway, thank you. Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. So it should be no surprise to anyone that it's a challenge to educate children if they're not attending school in terms of the education that we provide. And so we have noticed for some time, years, that we have seen a decrease in attendance rates across the state, and increase in truancy and chronic absenteeism. And that is not limited to the state of Louisiana. That is a national phenomenon that's happening across the country, and it has been further exacerbated as a result of COVID. And unfortunately, in many instances, some students believe that because of the flexibilities that happened during the COVID pandemic, that school is optional, attendance is optional, and it's not. And so what we're trying to do is launch basically a multi-agency cross-sectional approach to looking at what are the challenges that are creating chronic absenteeism in the state and the truancy issues that we have here. Just as a stat that I found of interest, I read a few weeks ago where the city of Detroit has a 60% chronic absenteeism rate. So 60% of the children in the school system there in Detroit are chronically absent. And so we certainly know that we have work to do in Louisiana. We're thankful we're not at that number. But we want to launch this multi-agency approach to trying to solve for this. And so I've asked Dr. Tumble to lead up this effort. And so she's going to make a presentation along with Dr. Singleton and Dr. Z, I believe, to talk a little bit about what we have moving forward.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Quintina Tumble, Department of Education. As you see, we have a team of people here with us. This is launching our Success Through Attendance Recovery Task Force. It is not only a multi-division LDOE initiative, but as you can see, and you'll hear later, we have other agencies that will join forces with us to lead this work. So today our goal is really just to give you like an overview, the purpose of this presentation, the existing work that's happening at LDOE, also the existing work that's happening in other agencies, and then our efforts and our next steps towards building this task force and some of the outcomes aligned to the task force. So that's what we'll cover today. We always start with our educational priorities. Dr. Brumley already opened, just indicating that it is our sincere belief that in order for our students to reach these educational priorities and our 6 critical goals, they need to be in school. And so we start from a place of looking at our goals and how our students are measuring against our goals and the priorities that we have set forth to actually help our students achieve. And so when we look at that, we look at our, when we look at that, we look at our attendance rate. And anyone looking at this slide would believe that in Louisiana, we are doing great. Our students are coming to school. If you look at the data here, we have no less than 90%, and that is great. Our students are in school. However, we started asking further questions. Like what is really the causal factors when we start thinking about chronic absenteeism, when we look at truancy, and then what is the impact on student outcomes and achievement? And so that is what we're hoping to not only answer that question, but also implement solutions for our students and for our families alongside of our other state agencies. I would say in the 2 districts that I've worked in, we have done initiatives around chronic absenteeism to increase our students' attendance, and we've had success. And so I'm really excited to be able to bring some of the knowledge that we've learned in school systems, some of the work that's happening already with our child welfare and attendance state leaders and district leaders to the forefront and really coordinate efforts. So again, looking at the attendance, we've had consistent attendance against all elementary, middle, junior, high, combination, all schools. And then we did see a 1.3% decrease in 2021. So that does cause us, again, some alarm and say, okay, what is it that we need to look at alongside of this data to answer a few more questions? At this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Z. He works in our on our AAA team, our accountability assessment and analysis team, and they've been doing some work since we've been asking the difficult questions, and they have just a data perspective that we can add to some of the work that we're doing.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Just want to touch briefly on some of the data that we have here at the state level that speaks to how attendance and being in school really matters for student achievement. So what you see in front of you is our LEAP scores, percent mastery and above for 2018 and 19 for all of our these are our LEAP scores for all of our students in grades 3 through high school in ELA and math, broken down by how many days of school those students missed. And as you can see, overall, we see this regardless of student group, we see this correlation between students being in school and their LEAP scores. So across all of our students in that year, 48%, there was a 48% mastery rate for students who missed 0 through 4 days of school. And it steadily decreased by the time students were missing more school. So that when they missed 15 or more days of school, that's what we consider chronically absent. The mastery rate was cut in half to 24%. And you see this really across all racial groups in this case, that same correlation. And we see this across other student groups too. So regardless of whether students are economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities or an English learner, we see this correlation, this strong correlation between students being in school and better performance on our standardized tests. So one of the questions we always ask when digging into this from a data perspective is what we're seeing a case of correlation or is it causation? So one of the things we did look at is that, is there some sort of independent impact that missing school has on students? So using the state's FAM model, which is basically a statistical model that controls for other factors such as student demographics or prior test scores, we do see this independent impact of students missing school. So on average, for each day of school a student misses, there is a decrease in their scaled scores on standardized tests. Being chronically absent in general results in a weak scale score that's approximately 2 scale score points lower after controlling for all those other demographics. And we see the impact being greater or sometimes less depending on the subject area. It's particularly strong in math and the earlier grades, but less impactful in ELA and in high school. So this time I'll turn it over to Dr. Singleton.
Good morning. So we would like to now shift our focus to the data on chronic absenteeism and truancy. Chronic absenteeism is defined as 15 or more days missing school for any reason, unexcused or excused. So 15 days, as Dr. Z stated, we see that impact on the students' LEAP scores on previous slides. So this particular slide shows data from 2018 to 2019 and 2020 and 2021 school years. The number of chronically absentees increased overall, as well as in the identified subgroups from the academic year immediately preceding the pandemic to the 2020-2021 academic year. Now let's look at some truancy data. Truancy is defined as a student with 5 or more unexcused days tardy or absent in a semester. This graph shows the trends from 2016-17 through 2020-2021. There was an increase from 17 to 18, and then it went as low as 28% in 2019-2020. Changes in how attendance was reported in response to suspension, a child just out of school due to discipline, a child may have been marked as absent or truant. Post 2017-18, school systems had to standardize how they reported attendance, which disincentivized the practice just of sending students out. So how do we address truancy? Truant students benefit from interventions that are derived from a school bonding perspective. And the most effective truancy prevention programs include mentoring, law enforcement, communication training, and community involvement. We'll discuss this more as we proceed with the presentation. So let's look at chronic absenteeism and truancy. As the concept of chronic absenteeism gains traction across the country, some people are under the mistaken impression that this is a politically correct way of saying truancy. Educators, policymakers, and journalists often use the words interchangeably, describing the same problem with the same old solution, but they are not the same. Chronic absenteeism, to say again, is when a student is absent 15 or more days, unexcused or excused. When students are not in school.
Dr. Singleton, excuse me, is that per semester or per year, just for clarification?
Per year. When students are not in school, whether excused or unexcused, there's a loss in instructional time. That's chronic absenteeism. The definition of chronic absenteeism is the same across the country. That is key. It is the same from one state to the other. Louisiana defines truancy as 5 unexcused absences or tardies within a semester. Federal law requires the tracking of truancy, but it is defined by each state. There's no consistent definition across the states. As you've heard, many people use these terms one and the same, but they are different. Earlier in the presentation, as Dr. Z stated, you saw, as Dr. Timmel stated, you saw the overall attendance rates, and they looked pretty good. But when we took a closer look at the data, as what Dr. Z presented, we saw that chronic absenteeism had made a difference on our LEAP assessment data. So what are we doing as an agency? You You've seen this particular slide before. This is our key performance indicators that shows how we are focusing on engagement and attendance. We also have various investments that we have made with regards to engagement and attendance. So within ESSER and year funding, we have a child welfare and attendance position. We have implemented dropout early warning systems. We have a partnership with LSU for the Attendance Alliance. We are implementing 9th grade academies and just focusing on overall student re-engagement. And we are continuing to use the gear funds in the coming year to focus on attendance and engagement. These are some of the current initiatives we have at LDOE. We have a monthly child welfare and attendance call. We're engaging with our child welfare and attendance officers across the state. This year at the Jumpstart Convention, we had a CWA Summit, and we're going to continue that in 2023. We are revising and launching the CWA guidance that has been kind of dormant for the past 10 years. We are providing support to school systems to make attendance a priority. With the gear funds in the coming year, we hope to train CWA officers using attendance works trainings that they have nationally done. And again, we also have other partnerships as well. So we want to bring in our partners that we have with us today. We're going to start with Judge Gail Grover from Juvenile Court, Judge District B. And then we also have individuals from the Louisiana Department of Health. And they're going to talk about the Project Aware grant that we have with them. We work in conjunction with them. And we also have adverse childhood experiences and trauma-informed PD. That is policy that was passed in January of this year, where we actually work with LDH to create a video that school systems have to implement to train their staff members on this. And so we actually have that video completed. It will be on the website within the coming week. And we're putting out guidance to school systems so that they can engage in that particular training. Judge Grover.
Thank you. And good morning. As stated, I am Judge Gail Grover, and I sit at the East Baton Rouge Juvenile Court Division B. I am glad to be with you this morning. We at Juvenile Court, along with our local partners, I am here to give you an example of a multi-agency approach to addressing truancy in our particular community. Intentionally focusing on truancy, educational readiness, and the intersection between juvenile justice system and the administration of justice is what our focus is, and what I hope and pray that you will take away this morning. We wish that all of our children and young people are successful, and education is a vital part of that equation. It is my hope that my statements today will inform your decision-making and impact the report regarding student absenteeism. Well, to get to, for time's sake, to get to what we are doing locally, we have a dedicated juvenile court truancy docket that has a multi-agency approach in that chronic absenteeism and truancy is addressed through both FINS, Family in Need of Services, as well as our criminal justice or our revised statute 14 criminal laws for improper supervision. We see about 120 to 150 cases a month. We have set aside 3 days to address truancy in our community because of the importance and the intersection that it has with the criminal justice system and our status offenders. The diversion tool that we have selected and actually created involves an attendance improvement plan. It is a plan that operates within a 3-month period because of the urgency of reconnecting our young people to their educational settings. It involves the district attorney's office as well as the office of the public defender, parental accountability that is built into the plan and speak directly to our parents, as well as CWA, Child Welfare and Attendance Office, and the TASC program, the Truancy Assessment Center program. They offer some aspect of case management as well as youth support, and again, the accountability piece on behalf of systems, children, and parents. This coordinated services that is also provided includes our TRUCE program, which is a program that focuses on counseling referrals as well as transportation, which is an ongoing issue for families in most communities, as well as parental support. We also include Project Impact, which offers trauma-informed services as well as tutoring to help those students who come before the court to catch up in a time that is outside of the structured classroom. In addition, our court has created Project MADE, which is a mentoring program that engages our community. We believe our community cares about our people, but we must provide a way for them to have a meaningful impact. Therefore, we have established a program which we call more of an educational advocate that inspires and encourages our young people to reconnect with school and to deal with issues that they may encounter while they are in their educational environment. It includes the Big Buddies program, which includes evidence-based practices, as well as positive parenting program, better known as Triple P, which is also an evidence-based program. So as you can see, besides the systems that I have stated, including the district attorney, the public defender, and the court itself, as well as the school system, we have also incorporated community-based services because they are important. We have also included our parents in a real way so that issues can be identified and urgently addressed with the goal of reconnecting our young people to their educational community. The reason why we did this is because in our 2015-2016 data, East Baton Rouge Parish had a 47% truancy rate. In 2016 to 2017, it was a 54% truancy rate. In 2017 to 2018, it was a 54.28% truancy rate. We were trending in the wrong direction. And the question was, is there anything that we can do across the board with all of our partners? And the answer was yes. In 2019, we began to collaborate, and what was the result of that is what I just explained to you, is a collaborative truancy initiative that includes the court and all partners who are important to our kids getting the education that they need. These partners are committed to addressing the issues, and we began to implement this program despite COVID in the 2020-2021 school year. We are in our second year of implementation, and we have incorporated a measuring process so that we can measure success. We want to know that there are results to the work that we are doing. I am confident by the cases that we see in our court that we are. We have been successful in reconnecting high school students and graduations, evidenced by pictures that I have received with the bloomers and cap and gowns. We have also reconnected middle school students as well as elementary school students. In some cases, we have had to file criminal charges against parents, particularly those with kids who are in elementary school, using revised statute 1492.2, not for the point of ever placing a parent in a confined or removing the parent from the community, but simply to bring the parent into the circle of decision-making in a way that they can be held accountable. That has been a positive method of incorporating them and identifying the issues quickly and also the solution. And lastly, before I leave, it is important that accountability is established for all partners. So during our court sessions for those 3 days, we make sure that not only the children and the parents are appearing in court, but CWA appears in court, the tax program appears in court, the mentoring program appears in court, the impact team appears in court, as well as our troops. We identify where the gaps and where the concerns are as a team on those days. And that affords us an opportunity to develop solutions and then hold folks accountable for implementing those solutions. And so I hope that what we have been able to do in our community as a multi-agency approach is something that you can consider as you deal with chronic absenteeism and truancy. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Members, comments before the judge leaves this morning? Dr. Bowden?
I'd be interested, I appreciate the work that you all are doing and that you're taking a community approach to it. I guess I'm interested in knowing what challenges that you all have had, especially as the department looks to, be more supportive of this.
Yes, when we initially started the program, we were intentionally focusing on ninth graders. During the 2019-2020, we had 402 ninth graders who were classified as truant. We expanded what we were doing to cover all grades, which is why I spoke mostly on that. And so one of the barriers is not having not having the preferred amount of resources in our CWA. It would be really great to have additional CWA supervisors that are available. Right now, they are assigned to schools, and some schools exhibit more issues with truancy than others, but the resources are not there to double up on those particular schools for those particular students. And so that's one of the things that we see. And I also want to mention that we are not just East Baton Rouge Parish School System. We are receiving kids who are coming from our Baker School System, from our virtual academy, from the state virtual academy, and so from charter schools. All of our students are welcome to participate. And again, some of the barriers is that some of these school systems do not have dedicated truancy officers, child welfare and attendance officers.
Thank you.
Other members? Mr. Castillo?
Thank you, Mr. Morris, and thank you again for raising this issue for all of us in the state to take a look at. As I was listening to Judge Grover's comments and the efforts being made here in EDR, and looking at the numbers that Dr. Timmel presented in the beginning, where, as she correctly pointed out on the surface, and Dr. Singleton, it looks like the truancy rate, chronic absenteeism isn't so bad, but when you drill down, perhaps by parish, it's a lot worse. Do we have data on a parish by parish, school district by school district basis that we can compare? Because when you look at 90+% attendance rate, that seems like a really, relatively speaking, good number. But when I listen to Judge Grover's comments and talking about over the years 50, 60%, that's atrocious. And I'd like to be able to have a better understanding of what's happening across the state, by district, by parish, and maybe we can figure out how to serve those districts. Obviously, this is not only a best practice, but a great practice in terms of the collaboration that's happening here in EDR. And Judge Grover, thank you for all of your years of service and your work in this particular area. But I saw Dr. Timmel nodding yes, that we have that data.
Yes.
Can you share just kind of broadly maybe what it provides, and if it was provided before, maybe share with us again in some written form later?
Yes, I can absolutely provide it for you. The data that we demonstrated earlier, of course, is a roll-up of all of our LEA data. And so we did look at like our highest 10 performing districts, the ones with the least amount of chronic absenteeism, or the greatest, the ones with the highest number. So we do have that information. I would say, if I remember correctly from some of the data, of course, our larger systems, of course, would have a higher number of chronic absenteeism. But then we did have within that top 10 number, some of our charters represented. And so one action item of the task force is to drill down to that LEA specific data, look at best practices, evidence-based strategies that's being used in our systems where they're showing promising practice for curtailing chronic absenteeism and truancy. And so we can provide you the breakdown for the LEAs because we do have access to that.
What are we doing to sort of connect the dots? This presentation does a good job of pointing out the correlation between academic performance, percent mastery and above, by the number of absences, for example. We're going to have a discussion later today with regard to accountability. We're going to have a discussion with regard to early literacy. And now that we're zeroing in on truancy, thanks to Mr. Morris's efforts, globally from the department's perspective, are we sort of looking at how do we put all of these pieces of the puzzle together to sort of push further to get greater academic progress across the state?
I would answer that by saying that is the purpose for the formation of this task force. We did identify by various meetings, various work streams internally and externally, that many of us are doing various things with students around increasing attendance or decreasing chronic absenteeism and truancy. And while we talk about it, we are not demonstrating a coordinated or concerted effort to work on it collectively. And so the purpose of this task force is to do that. And so we've identified the causal factors, we've identified the issue, we have solutions that's happening across the state, but the goal of this task force is to bring that together and come out with an action item or action plan to address what can we do statewide from a agency-wide perspective internally and then our external agencies to make sure that we're coordinated instead of just collaborating.
So I take it that the task force will lay out kind of a timeline with some deliverables. Here's what we expect to accomplish in about what time period, is that right?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Castillo. Superintendent Boccia.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see that we're looking at this multi-agency task force issue. We tried to do some of that in the area where I'm from, and what we have found too, obviously at the elementary level, it is more of a parent problem to get their 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old to school each day and to get them here on time. And then as the child grows, when we get to the high school level, then it becomes a lot more of the student issue. And Judge, I would be very interested, and I can't remember this exactly, but the legislation that's enforced under the statute that you outlined, does it pertain to consequences potentially if you go all the way the legal route for K-8 students? Whereas at the high school level, I don't see that same legislation would keep the parents of high school students that are considered truant. And that's one of the, I think, drawbacks that in our school district, we're trying to focus more heavily on that elementary and middle school age, because it does, when we get to the extreme case, have some teeth in terms of statute, in terms of law. Whereas it's a much murkier area at the high school level to hold someone accountable because we're back to the student. Am I correct in that? Or?
You are, in a sense that for our older students who fall under the FIN statute, the Family in Need of Services, under Chapter 2 of Title 7 of the Children's Code, it's really applicable to all children who are under the age of 18, but more times than not, for the older students, a FINS petition is filed, and with a FINS petition brought, bringing a child into court, it is actually not just the child, it is the family that comes under the authority of the court. Ultimately, the family can be given orders by the court to comply with certain conditions designed to connect the students back to their school. And the actions of whether it's the student or the parent can be addressed under this statute. You ask ultimately what could happen. A child could be removed from their parents' custody and placed in state custody, either through the Department of Children and Family Services or the Office of Juvenile Justice. We have not had to do that. as we have initiated this program. There have been cases where our attendance improvement plan has not been successful with a student, and therefore we would proceed through the court process under our FINS statute, which is why it's so important that the Office of Public Defender is involved at the initiating stage of this initiative. As to the criminal statute, when it is the elementary students and the parents are more culpable in the child being truant or having chronic absenteeism, then the law does have, as you stated, different consequences. That includes fine and or incarceration. Thank you. Welcome.
Other comments? Ms. Ellis?
Hi, thank you. As an educator myself, the truancy issue continues to be an issue, and the chronic truancy is a whole other conversation. I guess my question is, I know with COVID, there's been a huge backlog in court cases, and truancy kind of falls into that. I'm curious, have you experienced this, and what have you all done to catch up?
I'm proud to say that for our East Baton Rouge Juvenile Court, even in light of the pandemic and the coming to halting all processes that we had throughout our community, our juvenile court in essence stopped holding court for a period of about a week. We quickly turned to virtual court and continued with not only our foster care cases, our needed care cases, and our delinquency cases, but also our status offenders cases, which is what the truancy initiative would fall under. And so we didn't necessarily have a backlog, we just had long nights.
Right. Well, I've talked to my child welfare and attendants in different parts of my community and then even in other districts, and I think the concern is some things you mentioned, just sheer workload. The workload is intense. And the other piece was just having enough days in the week to meet with parents and students and deal with the true truancy issue. We even talked about, parents missing work to do this, and talked about, weekend court, night court, different things that could bring more, we could catch up. So just curious if that would be part of this discussion as well.
If I can comment, when we initially started, the dockets were extremely long. And that's where the long evenings, because we did have a backlog, if you will, of students who were classified as truant. And so just that initial process. Right now, we are probably in a place where we can incorporate those new cases and do those review cases in a way that is reasonable and they're encouraged to refer to the LGEs for support for students in schools. There are prevention coordinators that are located at the local government entities that are available to school counselors for assistance with mental health referrals in their area. Mental health promotion resources and materials are made available to those prevention coordinators. OBH has a prevention, wellness, and workforce development section that specifically focuses on suicide prevention and awareness activities. Also, OBH manages the state suicide prevention plan that includes training in suicide prevention for communities. We also can provide you with the link to that state suicide prevention plan if you would like to review that. And so OBH collaborates with LDE for Project AWARE 1 and Project AWARE 2. AWARE stands for Advancing Wellness and Resiliency in Education. And through that collaboration with the Louisiana Department of Education, the Office of Behavioral Health, we provide technical assistance surrounding providing resources to Project AWARE. And Project AWARE is funded by a SAMHSA grant, and it was awarded to LDOE in collaboration with OBH. The purpose of Project AWARE is to increase awareness surrounding mental health issues among school-age youth. It provides training to school personnel and other adults who interact with school-age youth, and then detect and respond to mental health issues of students.
It also connects school-age youth who may have had behavioral health issues and their families to needed services. So ODH, we also partnered with the Louisiana Center for Prevention Resources, and we partnered with them to coordinate mental health promotion and suicide prevention trainings. Through that partnership with LCPR, we offer gatekeeper trainings and train the trainers. Some of these trainings include signs of suicide, question, refer, question, persuade, refer, START, applied suicide intervention skills training, which is ASSIST, and Safe Talk, which is suicide awareness training and gatekeeper training. START and QPR, those are both online curriculums, and currently those are available online. In fiscal year 23, ODH will offer some additional in-person suicide prevention trainings to include signs of suicide, ASSIST, and Safe Talk. So signs of suicide, that's a universal, it's a school-based prevention program designed for middle schools ages 11 through 13 and high schools ages 13 to 17. And the goal of SOS is to decrease suicide and suicide attempts by increasing student knowledge and adaptive attitudes about depression. QPR, the question, persuade, and refer, that's another gatekeeper training. And that's for suicide prevention, which is designed to teach lay people and professional gatekeepers the warning signs of suicide, signs of crisis, and how to respond. Gatekeeper trainers can include anyone who's strategically positioned to recognize and refer someone at risk. So this could be parents, friends, neighbors, teachers, coaches, caseworkers, police officers. And the START program that's offered online, that's appropriate for ages 13 and above. That's a 90-minute online program. It prepares trainees to recognize when someone's having thoughts of suicide, engage them, and then connect them to further help. And then the START course, it does provide an interactive element and simulations that are designed to help support learning and provides ongoing access and refreshers to trainees and participants afterward. The Safe Talk program is designed to help participants age 15 or older. It helps to break down the stigma surrounding suicide. It teaches the participants to recognize when others are struggling and lead them to further help. And then lastly, the ASSIST program is designed to help participants age 16 and older recognize when someone may be at risk for suicide, work with them to create a plan, and then support them immediately and then connect them to additional services.
Thank you.
Sure, so I did want to add,
Excuse me, before we transition here, just give members an opportunity here if there's any questions for LDA. Okay, hearing none. Please proceed.
Okay, I did want to clarify for those that may not be familiar with our local governing system. Our state, for the Department of Health Office of Behavioral Health, is divided into 10 different geographic areas. And so the list that Dr. Timmel has provided is like the main office for the local governing entities, but they cover all 64 parishes across the state. And they do provide, whether it's mental health, substance abuse, or developmental disability services, they help manage the services in their particular catchment area of the state. So I just wanted to share that. So not only are the services that we provide available to students, but they're also available to staff or parents that you may want to refer to the local governing entity system of the Office of Behavioral Health.
Thank you. I did have one question. You mentioned a number of services that are available. When I step on a traditional campus, what I see is the ratio of students to counselor at the site is 300, 400 plus the one, right? I can imagine, how that works. But given all the social and emotional issues that we have today in schools and just across the globe, I'm interested in the process on a regular basis. How does a school or a counselor engage so that they can take advantage of some of these services? There's a 1-800 number to LDH and make the connection that way, or how does that connection typically work?
Well, with a connection through Project Aware, there is what's called an SDQ, Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire that's done for students that might be at risk. And that can be done by anybody that interacts with the student. And then once that referral is made, they're referred to a counselor. All of the resources that we have, we make sure that we share those with the community project managers that are over the school districts. And the information is disseminated through those CPMs down to the local school districts, those resources.
And I would like to add that with, so if it's not part of Project Aware, I think what would be beneficial is while you have the list of the local government entities, another document that we can share is a map. So that lists out, as we were looking at, man, we have the parishes listed. But at each local governing entity, there's an executive director, there is a treatment staff, and then there's a prevention staff. So the prevention coordinator can be contacted. We'll make sure that you have, that everybody would have those particular resources available, that they can pick up the phone and make a call. Because not only are we able to provide treatment services, right? But we're also able to provide information dissemination. So information about depression, suicide, mental health issues. Our office would be able to, if we're able to link them right with the school counselors, then they can develop a relationship and they would be able to receive a lot of different, not only services, but also information that could be beneficial for them.
So 2 questions. How old is Project Aware? How long has it been in existence?
Project Aware 1, the first funding period started 2018 through 2023. The second grant, Aware 2, funding is from September of 21 through 26.
How many cases do you manage in a month? How many calls do you get in a month? 700,000 students that attend public schools in this state. I'm curious how many calls do you get in a month?
Okay, well, for Project Aware, it's only in 6 districts. Project Aware 1 is in Monroe City Schools, St. Bernard, and Jefferson Parish. Project Aware 2 is in Boyles, Natchitoches, and Tangipahoa. So it's a pilot, and it is a small group of students that are impacted. I would have to refer to LDOE for those number of enrollments, but it is a small group that is enrolled.
So basically only 10% of the districts in the state have this resource available?
The Project Aware. Now, there is other prevention coordinators that are at the local governing entities statewide that have these resources available as well. We make sure that we share all of our resources statewide through our local governing entities. And what Project Aware does is it tries to connect the school districts with the LGEs for coordination of care.
Thank you. Superintendent Rocha?
Okay, I'm one of those 3 school districts that were named as the first recipient in the first round. And it is a federal fund, it is a project federally funded which will expire soon for my district. And then I think there are a few others in that second round that we discussed. We focused our Project Aware grant on our alternative school, and we make that an integral part of what is offered at the alternative school. We have partnered with the Methodist Health Foundation through this to supply additional social work services and therapy services for our kids on campus. We also have a partnership with LSU Med School with the same focus. If we didn't have these things, that would be a big hole in the program that we're offering specifically for our kids who have not been successful in regular settings. Now, having said that, and look, the Department of Health, everybody does a tremendous job with the resources they have. So when we're looking at this particular handout, and we're looking at 10 agencies across the state that cover all parishes, I can only speak from a local perspective where, because they're so understaffed, it's really not enough. Because in the agency that oversees our district, the waiting list for the services is tremendous. They do not offer anything at the school site. So when you're talking about transportation for families and kids and doing it in the evenings and doing it on whatever time is available, whereas if any of these are going to be significant, make a significant impact, it has to be part, to me, of the school day, the school program, where kids are not missing a lot, because it can take a half a day or more to go to something if you're not living right near it. To go into what we call into the city, or go into another parish to receive services that they have. So this whole concerted effort, while there are pieces of these things that we're very grateful for, and there are some federal dollars coming down, and we're using some of our ESSER monies to augment this as well. If it's not an integral part of the program for the kids who really need those services, just like when the judge was talking about how they minimize the loss of class time in trying to help with their attendance improvement plans and such, this is another issue that is sorely needed now for kids on campus as part of our regular program and options. And it continues to boil down to funding and human resources. There just aren't enough people available to hire and provide these particular services. To the need out there is much greater than what we seem to be able to supply and in the right venue. So hopefully this task force, as they explore all of these issues, these services need to be combined, and we used to call them these old wraparound services, you know, those of us have been around a long time. But if they're not provided in the venue where it's going to make a significant difference for kids, we're losing a lot of what could be a potential positive impact. So hopefully, I'm glad to hear that everybody's going to be involved in this and see what can we bring together as a group to address these services where the kids need them at the time they need them, those students and their families.
Thank you, Superintendent Boucher. Members, other comments? Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for spending time with us this morning and discussing a lot of the preventative measures that you all are putting in place. Again, it is our goal to definitely coordinate these services as mentioned previously. So with everything that you've heard the data. I often say that we are student-driven and data-informed, so we walk you all the data. But our true goal here is to drive change for student outcomes and to increase our students' attendance in school for those that are labeled as chronically absent or truant. And so our call to action is to create this multi-agency task force. And, in the development of this, we've had several conversations with different stakeholders, agencies, and what I find interesting, not only from a state perspective, but just from an LEA perspective, many times we're sitting in the room and we point fingers at who's not doing what or who should be at the table. And so this task force, the goal of this task force is to bring everyone to the table and to have the necessary conversations around data, around understanding the critical issues, setting solutions to those issues, having more of a coordinated effort, more so than just collaboration or an awareness of what other agencies are doing, creating a strategic action plan to with recommendations to address the issues that we uncover. And then also, as Mr. Morris mentioned earlier, create key performance indicators by which we can monitor progress over time. So our next steps, I'm skipping the slide. These are some of the agencies that we have already made contact with. As Judge Grover mentioned earlier, and she brought this to life for us, including the Office of the Public Defender on the front end of this work will be essential because of the role that they have with their juvenile division and dealing with juvenile issues and legal representation. And so while we've started a list of agency partners and we've reached out to some, we are still adding to that list. So if you see something here and you see something is missing, an agency is missing, please email us, let us know, or let us know today. That would be helpful. And so we're continuing that work. Next steps, today, of course, we're having this conversation with you all, inviting you all to participate however you choose to, but to also inform the direction that we're going. July, we're thinking the week of July 20th, we will launch our first task force meeting. And then October, we hope to come back to you to provide an update with the work that we've done from July through October.
Thank you, Dr. Tim. Members, any comments? Dr. Bowden?
I see, this might be baked into the recommendations and just not explicitly written, but I do think there's a lot of value in looking at the research that's been done on attendance and what the research has revealed in terms of what might be most effective. I see you guys are interested in looking at other SEAs, and I've heard, looking at LEAs to find exemplars. I think those are all good things. But I mean, we do have a wealth of research in this country, and I think if you get that on the front end and help present that to stakeholders, I think it will help as your committee is working to problem solve and those kinds of things. The other piece is just, I don't have necessarily an agency on this list, but I know principals in schools and counselors in schools are dealing with this on a daily basis. And so I would like for you to keep in mind how you might incorporate their wisdom and their work around this. And also, I think anything that you do will need to be communicated out to these groups. So I'd certainly want to make sure that you had appropriate school and district staff who are connecting in on these. And again, I think, anytime we can highlight exemplars about and where we deal with very similar challenges, I think, across the state. But when we've got these solutions that we know are already working in Louisiana and we can put those front and center, it seems to be very positive. It gives us an opportunity to highlight some of our educators and our students and families in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bowden. Other members? I had a couple of comments. In your call to action, you referenced a strategic plan. Do you have a sense of when we would see that? Would that be October, or that still yet to be determined, or what should our expectations be around that strategic plan?
I would say yet to be determined. I believe that we will set a course of action with a timeline at that first meeting in July when we look at the data, look at the literature review that we've already started, looking at what's happening across the state, so giving us time to work across those multiple agencies. But I would assume that in October we will definitely be able to provide some information around that plan. If not a draft, we'll definitely have an update.
Thank you. And then last question, I was really interested in the testimony this morning on how the social and emotional issues were being addressed, and conversations I've had with LGLE staff. I'm just really taken aback by the things that keep kids out of school today, right? The bullying, the other issues, societal issues in place today that impact kids and the decision-making process. So anything you guys can do to follow up on that testimony and identifying those specific issues and what that engagement looks like with those support services. I'd really like to hear more about that.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments? No public comments. Members, that's a good testimony here. Got a motion to receive the report. Are there any objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 51, item 4.1. Consideration of the reauthorization of successful course choice providers and a status report regarding course choice providers. Recommendation is to approve the reauthorizations of e-learning and mastery prep as outlined and to receive the status report.
A motion, Ms. Holloway, a second. Second, Ms. Ellis, thank you. Superintendent?
Yes, sir, that information is in your packet. There's no formal report.
Comments from members? Mr. Garvey?
Are we getting feedback on these courses regarding which ones are really being successful, which ones are students don't like so much? Do we have a exit report from students?
I'm not certain if we have an exit report. I can look into that. We do a review of these programs to make sure that they, meet the criteria that we set forth, and then they're authorized based on that review. But I can certainly check into exit interviews.
Other comments? Do we have any comment cards? All right. Do we have any exceptions to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 53, item 4.2, consideration of top university fast forward pathways and Jumpstart 2.0 career diploma fast forward pathways. Recommendation is to approve pathways as outlined. Backup documentation was revised for this item and a handout has been distributed.
I have a motion. Superintendent Bochet, a second. Mr. Rock? Members, do we have any comments? Superintendent Brumman?
I just want to call this out. This is really quality and exciting work for kids. If you look at the listing of opportunities that our students will now be able to take advantage of from a diploma pathway standpoint, it's really exciting, both from the associate degree angle where we have new pathways such as cloud computing. We have opportunities in associate's degrees for cybersecurity, and the list goes on and on. And if you look at apprenticeship opportunities moving forward, we're approving apprenticeships in things like carpentry, electrical, welding, and these are opportunities where students can gain these apprenticeships. They can go from high school into the workforce with a high-wage job. And on the associate's degree side, this is lining up with much of the work that's taking place in systems throughout the state where they're trying to put students on a more coherent pathway of courses that lead to an associate's degree or a four-year degree. So this is really exciting, I think, for our board to be able to do this.
Mr. Gardner?
I had questions about two of these, the leadership and employability and the retail pathway. Sorry. The leadership and employability and the retail pathway. What does the leadership and employability, what direction are we trying to send children in with that pathway?
Which region are you referring to, Mr. Gardner?
While I'm looking that up, let me mention the retail. My question about the retail is that a high-paying job? Is that preparing children to be store clerks, or is that preparing them to run a retail store, manage a retail store?
Dr. Singleton, if you're with us, you could probably come speak to the individual pathway.
Could you repeat your question again for me? I can hear you all the way.
The first one would be regarding the retail, I guess you call it a pathway or retail course.
We're looking at 2.3 under business management and administration.
Business of retail, this is on page 56, am I on the right item? Business of retail operations and profit, NRF, under 2.5, pathway, hospitality, tourism, IBC to be added.
Okay, so that is the industry-based credential that is added to that particular pathway in hospitality and tourism. And so students who are participating in that particular pathway are seeking positions working in, say, in the New Orleans region with our Convention and Visitors Bureau, or perhaps our hotel industry or the restaurant industry. So that particular IBC is just a industry-based credential that they would earn to work in those particular areas.
So what is it about retail that they would be learning? Are they learning to be a store clerk, work a counter,
Yeah,
or
so,
are they learning how to manage a retail entity?
yeah, good question. So this particular IBC is the management jobs. So when,
Please identify yourself.
oh, I'm sorry, Jessica Longo, Executive Director, Quality
If I
Diplomas.
could, to give you the direction I'm trying to go in, is are we training them for a high-paying management of retail position or a low-paying store clerk position?
Yeah,
I'm concerned
so
about
as-
training kids for low-paying jobs.
Yeah, excellent. So as opposed to selling the products, the person working the register, this is going to be training people for the manager, regional manager side. So the ones that are making the schedule, ordering the stuff. So this is going to be that higher level of pay in which they manage others and manage a store.
Okay, that sounds much better than just what the word retail might indicate. And below that at 2.7, leadership and employability certification, new IBC portfolio. Employability sounds very, squishy. What is the details on that?
So that is an IBC that was erroneously left on this particular document. The Jumpstart Review Committee actually reviews all of the IBCs that we bring to you all to approve. So that one actually has been removed and we provided an updated document. So the Jumpstart, it was left on here by mistake. The Jumpstart Review Committee removed that one because it is a test of soft skills and we do not feel that that is the one that, well, they deferred it. So we're going to review that particular IBC in the future. While we believe that soft skills are important, a student earning this IBC would not earn a high-paying technical job. So that one has actually been removed from the document.
Well, I did it because that was one of my concerns. It's important to have the soft skills, but I don't think that's what we're trying to capture with this effort.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Garber, I want to differentiate between the Jumpstart pathways, which are a component of the traditional Jumpstart diploma, and the advancements that have been made there versus what you see in 4, which are your Fast Forward pathways, which are individual diploma pathways. So I just want to separate those two for you as well, because on the Jumpstart diploma that you were mentioning, these are pathways within that individual diploma.
While I have the floor, could I go back to the previous item to ask you to capture some more information? We talked about whether there were exit interviews, whether students were excited about those courses that we took. Are the courses that are overbooked, that have waiting lists that we might want to focus on expand? Are there courses that are overbooked and children just can't get into the courses because there's not enough space? Will we check into that?
Yeah, I mean, I would believe that if that were the case, at the individual system level, they would be making staffing accommodations to account for those things. So if you know that you have an excess of kids that want to do cloud computing, and you don't have as many kids that want to do this other particular pathway, then you would accommodate for that in the way in which you staff at your school and district level.
Can we, is there an easy way to get a feel for whether that problem exists, or?
I mean, but the pathways are options. So systems can use any of these pathways that might make sense to create staffing around them. I'm trying to figure out what we would be solving for there when the systems have been already.
You think they can solve the problem easy enough that they don't need any help?
I certainly could as a system leader.
Okay. Thank you.
Members, other comments? I just had two, whenever we worked on the SE accountability work group, one of the objectives for me personally was to put some focus on to ensure that we have parallel pathways with comparable opportunities for students on the Top G track as well as the Jump Start track. And if I look at the numbers here, I'm seeing 41 opportunities on the Top G track and 35 on the Jump Start track. So that gives me some comfort that we are in fact providing comparable opportunities both ways. So encouraged by that. And then Superintendent Brown, I just want to share with you that I attended a Workforce Development Commission meeting last month. I was very impressed by the representation of that group, Jessica's participation and representation from the LDOE. I thought it was a very diverse group, a lot of scrutiny and considerations that are given, and just really left there with a really positive appreciation for that group and the work they do. So thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, ladies. I'm sorry, I had to step out for a second, but I do have I see what you have proposed here. I appreciate, in particular, the Fusion 360 and the responsiveness and finding a path to get this one included. I'm trying to figure out the Jumpstart 1.0 to 2.0 changes. And I attended one of the sessions at Teacher Leader where you talked about a class, like with a particular class it's going to be in place. I guess one of the questions I have is the things that we are putting in place now, so if I have a 1.0 student who would still be a 1.0 with a class of 2023, would they be able to take the Fusion 360 and that credential count towards their graduation? Because I'm just like, the transition over is something that I'm struggling with.
Yeah, so the way we treat the request is 1.0 request and 2.0 request separately. So you make a request for Fusion 360 to be added to 2.0. We didn't add it to 1.0 also.
Okay, so it has to be added separately to 1.0 or for the next couple of years. Remind me again the class that Jumpstart starts with. Jumpstart 2.0.
Yeah, the transition year is grade 9 entry 2020-2021. So that is the one group of students that can choose either path. Prior to them it's 1.0, after them it's only 2.0.
Okay, so the group of kids that were in 9th grade in 2021, and what class are they going to be in? Class of? 22, 23, 24. Well, if they're 21 is 9th grade, 22, 23, 24. Does that sound right? And then every class that comes after them are 2.0. Help me figure out how many years of kids this stuff is not going to apply to between now and then.
What grade are your 2020, 2021 kids in right now? You in particular?
So this is 2022. You're asking somebody who has trouble remembering her age, right? I'm good with a lot of things. Time is not one of them. Okay. Somebody in the room knows it. Can y'all tell Jessica?
Rising 11. So you're 12th graders currently. So if you're 2020, 2021 is rising to 11th grade, they can be Jumpstart 2.0 or 1. So the only ones locked into 1.0 are your graduating seniors. Your seniors that will grow.
So the things that are listed here, so I see the K-16 pathway and the 2.0 request can apply to 11th graders, but it won't apply to seniors that are seniors this year. So we need to figure out other IBCs for those seniors.
Or just make a request of the review committee to have
Yeah,
added
how
to
long does that take?
So we plan on bringing it back in January as opposed to in June.
January review
of 2023. Which would be in time for even your January graduates.
Now my pen won't work. Someone help me here. Okay. Did you say it's not gonna be in time, Ms. Ellis?
I mean, I would feel uncomfortable as a counselor bringing a kid forward on something that I don't know is going to go through tonight as a senior.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I wanna thank you guys. Now that I'm like looking at transcripts and multiple screens and digging through 17,000 documents at 1.0, thank you so much. I wanna thank this board for passing 2.0. I don't know if you guys remember this. It was, I think, the most important thing we did in March of 2020, and some people didn't want to do it then. But I'm so glad that we did, because after that, we all went home for so long, and it's the redundancy of going document to document is awful. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the day when everybody is on 2.0. I think it's also just a lesson in how long how much of a runway it takes to get things implemented, right? Because we did this board this is our work in March of 2020, and here I am still hoping for it to be the full, I want on the interstate, I don't want to look at another 1.0 document, and I want all the students, to have all of these things available to them. Also, just in meeting with people in my community about jobs available for students, with the Fusion 360 work, it's absolutely incredible. We can educate students to get great paying jobs right out of high school. That's the beginning of careers. And because we're Cajun and this matters to us, they get to continue to live in our community. So that is an incredible value of our region. So I thank you so much. And I'm sorry you have to answer all these questions all the time, but this is where we are.
Thank you, Dr. Bowden. Other members? All right, we have some public comment cards. Carly Cooper supports the recommendation. I don't have an indication on here whether or not Carly wishes to speak or not. Okay, thank you, Carly. Also have a comment card from Dr. Therese Elder. Dr. Elder supports the recommendation. She wants to testify if needed.
I would actually like to speak.
Please identify yourself. Share with us.
I'm Dr. Teresa Ellender, the supervisor of STEAM for St. Lucie Parish School Board, and I want to thank y'all. This is an awesome opportunity for all of our students. I especially thank you for acknowledging the equity on both sides, because it's very important to me that all of our kids have these opportunities. We were so excited this year, we had a unique partnership with SLCC where our career centers became early college academies. And I got to see 2 students, first generation, get technical degrees, and the excitement and the tears from the parents and the students just lets you know it is so worth it. And we are truly gearing up, and I really look for this to be a huge success, because it does offer opportunities to students, first generation, second generation, it doesn't matter, and kids who never even thought they had that option. And so I appreciate you all, the members of this board, the Department of Education, Dr. Brumley, for everything that you're doing for our children, because they're going to replace us and they need the skills to do it. I thank you for it.
Thank you for sharing with us. Also have a comment card from Aline LaBeouf, who supports the documentation and also is willing to speak to your question. Thank you. No other comment cards. So members, we have a motion on the table to approve. Is there any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 60, item 4.3, consideration of an update report regarding literacy. Recommendation is to receive. Page 8 of your backup, it was revised in a handout.
Give a motion. Superintendent Bochet, can I get a second? Second. Mr. Roth, thank you. Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Just wanted to call out that we have had a number of wins legislatively and from this particular board, and then just within practices within the department and within our school systems around literacy over the last couple of years. just felt it would be appropriate today to ask Dr. Chasson to give the board a brief report of some of that movement in literacy, some of the things we are continuing to work on, and some of the goals we're hoping to hit over the next few years. So Dr. Chasson.
Yes, certainly. Good morning. Jenna Chasson, Assistant Superintendent, Office of Teaching and Learning, happy to provide you all with an update on our literacy improvement work and our plans moving into next school year. We know that our work is grounded in our belief statements with children as our highest priority, and we strive to reach our 6 critical goals by elevating our educational priorities. Our mission statement for our literacy work is that Louisiana students will have improved literacy outcomes through high-quality instruction and interactions by an effective teacher who is supported by leaders and families. Not only does reading serve as a major foundational skill for school-based learning, but reading ability is strongly related to opportunities for academic and vocational success. We know that reading success in the early grades directly leads to outcomes for children later on in their educational journey. Next, I have just a brief reminder of our 2021 Fall Reading Report, which shows our students reading on and above level on the compilation of our 4 literacy screeners that are administered statewide for kindergarten through 3rd grade students during the first 30 days of school. You all saw this data a few months ago when I delivered the Fall Reading Report. We did see growth across all levels this year, with overall growth just above 4%. But we also know that literacy rates have shown a steady decline in the last few years prior to this year. This is the first year-to-year growth we have seen since then. And although we are elated to see movement in an upward trajectory, we must acknowledge that we have a very long ways to go, with only about 49% of our Louisiana students entering this past school year reading on grade level. Another reminder about our ambitious literacy goal that we chose to set around 4th grade reading NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. In order to ground our literacy improvement plan in data so that we can best understand the impact of our robust literacy improvement activities, we want to set a clear, long-term, and quantifiable goal. We look toward a strong national indicator for reading ability so that we can do just that. And we wanted to know not only about Louisiana improvements in literacy, but also how we as a state stack up against the other states in our nation. Our goal is by 2027, Louisiana's 4th grade NAEP results will increase by 10 points in scale score in comparison to the 2019 results, placing Louisiana above the national average in 4th grade reading performance. If rankings would remain steady, this would place us in the 20s in national standing. Next, I'd like to provide some updates on some of our key literacy initiatives that will drive us to our goal. And just acknowledging where this work began, from the onset of our Early Literacy Commission a few years ago, to the department embracing literacy as a top priority by carving out a literacy team in the agency who develops and support our Louisiana Comprehensive Literacy Plan. This past year, you all approved several critical policy shifts in literacy that we are now supporting the field in implementing. Our Louisiana literacy pillars are the cornerstone of our literacy improvement work and were founded as a result of our action research through last year's literacy coaching pilot. We know that setting literacy goals is so important, and this includes communicating these goals to various stakeholders, including families, and monitoring these goals throughout the school year. We know that ensuring time is assigned specifically for core instruction and interventions that are grounded in the science of reading, monitoring the implementation of interventions, and ensuring students have access to books to practice reading skills is of utmost importance. We also know in order to do this work, our educators have to be armed with ongoing professional growth, focused on literacy, as well as for teachers to be trained and receive ongoing professional development on high-quality instruction all grounded in the science of reading. We also want to highlight and support the importance of families in a child's literacy journey. So we have a few updates on our work from this past year. We currently have engaged in a request for proposals to identify a single assessment to streamline data collection for literacy, and that work is ongoing. We have convened a variety of stakeholders to identify the consensus for how data from kindergarten through second grade could be integrated into reporting and accountability. Our literacy team released a series of resources to support teachers, site-level leaders, and system-level leaders in analyzing screener data. The series included analysis templates for beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of year, as well as a webinar on analyzing data to maximize impact. While not all school systems are currently conducting screeners throughout the school year, many of our systems have opted into this and are assessing their students throughout the year, as well as progress monitoring throughout. We've also piloted the Real Tutoring Program during the 2021-2022 school year to serve as a model for our larger scale tutoring work. We have provided a variety of resources to systems and schools to support the use of best practices to maximize time on behalf of student learning. I'm also excited to report to you all that we have been able to expand our support well beyond kindergarten through second grade during this past year. We've done this through releasing a series of third through fifth grade ELA foundation lessons. We know, unfortunately, that many of our students exit the second grade not reading on grade level. And so this series is designed for teachers to conduct 10 to 15 minute power lessons that reinforce previously taught phonics, grammar, and fluency skills, as well as builds upon that continuum throughout the school year for grades 3rd through 5th. We've also released a phonics inventory for 3rd through 5th grade teachers to identify gaps and determine entry points for interventions with students. Once a gap is identified, teachers will have access to interventions to provide explicit instruction. We've been able to expand our literacy team to now include a team member to support our 6th through 12th grade literacy efforts. We have already begun supporting teachers and leaders who attend our bi-weekly literacy office hours and through our school system support calls, where we are able to serve as a thought partner on expanding literacy plans and enhancing literacy efforts in 6 through 12. At Teacher Leader Summit this year, a series of 6 through 12 content literacy resources were released and will be ongoing support throughout next school year. So we're very excited about expanding our support above second grade into 3rd through 5th and then 6 through 12 content literacy focus. In March, we all brought to you recommendations about how we include the science of reading training for our kindergarten through 3rd grade teachers and leaders. We also once again recognize that this includes our kindergarten through 3rd grade teachers and leaders, but we have other teachers and leaders who also need support in the science of reading. And so we will be offering a science of reading training free of charge for our 4th through 8th grade educators, both teachers and leaders. We're highly encouraging our special education teachers to attend these trainings. So these will all be available free on our website throughout next school year. Our literacy team has provided a variety of professional development through online resources and webinars, including a science of reading series, a K2 writing series, and a 6th through 12th grade literacy series. Our literacy team will be actually taking these on the road throughout next school year as well across the state. Through our Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant, we have directly supported over 275 literacy coaches at our CIR, UIRA schools across the state. And we're excited to say that through Super App, we received an increase of requests to fund over 340 literacy coaches for next school year. So that's a substantial expansion of our current literacy coaching program. We're very excited about that. Through our ESSER funds, we have provided job-embedded support to our coaches through 16 regional literacy specialists. Our literacy coaches also participated in monthly virtual communities of practices where they came together to receive professional development. We will expand our support next year to include bi-weekly webinars, and we'll be opening our monthly communities of practice to include any teacher leader who is supporting teachers in literacy. So this is recognizing that not all schools and school systems may have literacy coaches per se, but they may have instructional coaches, teacher leaders, master teachers, mentor teachers, content leaders, anyone who supports teachers in their school, and we'll be inviting them as well to participate in our ongoing communities of practice meant for our literacy coaches. We also continue to partner with our education prep providers. Not only have we continued with our ELA collaborative, we have offered the Act 108 training to any ed prep provider who has been interested. We'll also begin hosting literacy office hours for our education prep providers to support the shifts that will happen as a result of the new policy changes that you all have approved around literacy in coursework. Through the revisions to policy recommended and approved by you all in March, schools will be required to share the results of literacy screeners with families. We have shared a variety of resources on engaging families to assist systems in using best practices, including a host of activities that are divided by age range, and literacy grab and goes. These are simple activities. They're all available on our website and our literacy library, and families can use them at home. We've also released a strategic guide for schools to partner with families and communities. We have school systems who have hosted family literacy workshops that model for families how to implement various literacy strategies, and we plan as a department to begin hosting some of these family workshops throughout the state next school year as well. So in looking ahead, we're excited for next year to continue our literacy improvement efforts. We've used a request for applications process to identify high-quality tutoring providers across the state, and school systems can choose to partner with these entities to provide tutoring services to students before and after school, during the school day, or during the summer. In addition, we have committed $40 million of our state ESSER set-aside funding to afford families the opportunity to opt into tutoring services for their children. We're collaborating currently with the Office of Technology Services to contract with a vendor who will manage this tutoring program through an online platform. The tutoring providers available to families via this online platform will be the same list of providers we have already identified through our request for applications process to identify high-quality tutoring providers. We're excited that these additional tutoring services will open directly to families this coming fall. Further professional development was provided at Teacher Leader Summit, and we'll continue offering support in how to create plans for students reading below grade level. We also had many popular sessions at Summit this year, presented by our literacy team that will be repeated and expanded throughout the state. These sessions were hands-on engagement for teachers and leaders to learn more about how to implement small group and literacy centers in classrooms, all based on the science of reading. Teachers lead these sessions with dozens of very tangible ideas for what to do to improve literacy instruction in their classroom, and they were very well received at Summit, and I expect they will be across the state next year as we host them as well. This concludes my update for today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Chason. Members, Dr. Vogel?
I'm looking at the background and the goals slide from the beginning of the presentation, and I'm wondering if there's variations in expectations across the grade level. Because when I look at this from a cohort group perspective, it seems to bounce back and forth. Have you guys talked about that aspect of it?
Yes, absolutely. So the screeners, you know, Dr. Bovee, that it's 4 potential literacy screeners that systems have to choose from. And it's different measures that are used per grade level. So every grade level actually tests something a little different when it comes to a child's literacy skills.
So when we get a screener, we won't see we'll have, I guess, the data is not gonna bounce around so much, is that?
It shouldn't, it will assess different things per grade level because it will assess for grade level skills, which is very different from year to year. But we'll be using a full battery of literacy assessments, whereas right now it is a piece, it is like one battery of an overall literacy assessment. It'll be a more comprehensive literacy assessment. So we should see like cohort tracking, I believe is what you're saying,
it's just
and we
something
don't see it here.
Yeah. I imagine that'll also help us understand problems better. So I look forward to getting better data on this because I know I'm enthusiastic about the things that we've put in place, but I'm looking forward to being able to get to a finer grain size because I think that our approach can be even more specific when we get to a finer grain size.
Mr. Gordon?
I have a couple of questions. You mentioned that we have 4 screeners now. Are we moving to 1 screener? When are we going to have that decision made, do you know?
So we're currently working with the Office of State Procurement to select that single screener. It has been a very lengthy process. We are looking forward to hopefully sometime over the next school year concluding that process. We have communicated to school systems that for the beginning of next school year, they should still do as usual and select one of those 4 possible literacy screeners. And we are looking forward to next school year finalizing our process, selecting 1 vendor so that we are prepared to move into the following school year with a single literacy screener statewide.
So it's fall of 23?
Yes, that is our goal.
Get narrowed down to 1. Okay. Going to, would you say slide 13? You have expanding literacy tutoring program, releasing accelerated tutoring resources, releasing 3 through 5, releasing 3 through 5, releasing 6 through 12. Did I hear you right that these that are not, these have been done, you have released these? These are not to be released, but you released them already?
Yes. We have in the last few months, and we have piloted a smaller scale literacy tutoring program through a federal grant that we were awarded at the beginning of COVID, our real tutoring program.
Thank you.
Mr. Martin?
Members of the comment. Mr. Castillo?
I just want to follow up a little bit on slide 13. So the releasing accelerated tutoring resources, would you explain that a little bit more? What exactly is the accelerated program, how it works, and what has been released?
Yes, absolutely. So the Accelerate tutoring resources are actually multiple things. We first released a guidance document over 1.5 years ago now. Really of best practices, research-based tutoring practices, what makes the most high impact tutoring and what to avoid for tutoring practices. But we also saw a real need for tutoring, high quality tutoring resources to put in the hands of these tutors, whether they were teachers, whether they were outside tutoring vendors, whether they were volunteers tutoring. We really wanted to arm them with some high quality resources. And so we began creating accelerated tutoring resources for math and ELA ourselves with our teacher leader advisors, who you all know work on small contracts for us throughout the school year on a variety of different things. We used a small but mighty army of them to create our accelerated resources for ELA and math, and we began releasing them about 18 months ago now, and released them over a series of time as they were completed, and they included ELA accelerated tutoring lessons and some for early literacy as well.
another question. You mentioned earlier in your presentation that there are 2 to 75 literacy coaches and about 3 to 40 requests for funds for literacy coaches. So how many teachers have been trained in science and reading? Do you have a number, or where are we in that process?
So part of Act 108 requires school systems to report to us once a year about the number of teachers who have successfully completed their training. We just received that data and we're still compiling it because that comes into us, I think, in just the past few weeks, Mr. Castillo. And so I can certainly provide that to you as soon as I have it. I don't have it in front of me now. I would say the number of folks who have actually completed the Act 108 training, I would suspect would be quite small at this point, because it is a rigorous and ongoing training. It takes a good amount of time to matriculate through. And so the number is probably pretty small for this first data pull, but we will have that data reported to us again next year around this time from our school systems, and I expect the number will have increased by then, but I can certainly provide it as soon as I have it.
Could I add on to just that statement, or with a question for Data? The science and reading training, as you pointed out, is 54 or 50 some modules long. That is a significant training continuum that takes, it's going to take a year, it's a long time for people to complete, because there are exercises that go along with each training module. I would be interested, so as far as what you're saying is a small number who will have completed it, because they have to complete each lesson, then they have to get a certification at the end, the document, which I would assume indicates completion. I'd also like maybe when we compile the data to look at those who have completed, but from my districts too, how many are in that process currently? In other words, you might have, I don't know, 5% of your people finished, but maybe 60% of them are getting to that point and they're in the continuum. So if we try to see not only total completion rates, but engagement rates that the people are actually doing the training in a multi-month or year process.
I think that's one of your KPIs, but it's not. We certainly like to see it in that format. Scott?
Yeah, it's, you said you haven't compiled the numbers that Mrs. Castillo was asking about. Do you think you would have those by the August DESA meeting?
Yes, we should.
Could we bring this back as an item to report on at the August meeting? That would be great. Ms. Boche mentioned that there's a certification process that happens at the end of the teachers taking all of these modules. Is that a test that they take to show that they have actually learned and internalized the information?
It depends on the vendor selected. If you all recall, there is a vendor list that Act 108 asks for us to compile. So we did that through a formal request for applications process. And so it depends on the vendor, but there is, for all cases, there is some sort of like successful completion and amount of knowledge and skill that a participant has to be able to demonstrate in order to be given the certificate of completion from that particular vendor.
And if it's not a test, how are the teachers evaluated to see if they have learned the material if it's not through a test?
There is all some form of test from every vendor.
Thank you.
Mr. Garvey, I'd like to add that the science of reading training, as Mr. Boche mentioned, isn't like you go to a workshop one afternoon and you're done.
Right.
This is like 50 modules that take about an hour each that you have
At least
to
an hour
complete.
each.
Yeah, over time. So this is really intense work that these teachers are going through, K through 3, as well as the administrators. But the other important part that I just don't want to be lost is the fact that we are doing work in higher ed for pre-certification, pre-service teachers, so that the coursework around reading in higher ed is now this. So we're not going to have to do it again after the students graduate from college, because it will be embedded into the way in which they learn at their university.
Kind of to that point, I've been trying to wrap my head around what is the science of reading. It's hard to capture it in one sentence, I guess, because it's 52 modules.
I have 50 modules I can offer you.
That's I would take you up on that, if you don't mind.
Sounds good. It is a back to the basics approach in many ways around phonics. And, it builds up ultimately to comprehension and being able to write. But it starts with the deconstruction of words, phonics, and how that's taught. And then it builds itself up ultimately to comprehension and writing. So happy to cue you in on some of those training opportunities.
You could send me a copy of the materials, I'd appreciate it. And what I've heard a lot from is the academics, like you describing what the science of learning is, and let me throw this thought out there, if all the best members think it's worth it, maybe we can do this. Maybe have someone, a teacher who has gone through it, come in and explain what it was that they were doing before and what they're going to change to do because of what they learned in this process. I think that would be an interesting perspective. But I throw that out there, check and see if other BESI members think that would be
Well, I mean, we can certainly like to hear from other BESI members on it, but we can add that to the presentation that we do next time where we do an update on those individual numbers, those numbers of individuals trained.
Please think about it.
And I think what's important to know, we would hope that as our teachers emerge from certification programs, that they already have this completed, Superintendent probably was talking about. And later on, somewhere in some agenda, we're going to look at, it seems like we may be here long today, but in the teacher preparation programs, aside from the colleges, you're going to see, well, I'm sure y'all read your materials, that's going to be incorporated as a requirement in all teacher preparation programs. So if you have an alternate preparation program, that particular teaching must be included, whether it's within credit hours, if they're credit courses, or training modules of some type that those teachers or potential teachers will have to be involved in. And hopefully at some point then, we won't have to do it once certified teachers are hired, that it becomes part of the college curriculum and then the alternate provider curriculum as well. But those modules, if done properly, when those teachers listen to them or do the training, then they have to reflect, and they have to implement, then they have to take periodically checks in terms of little assessments to see, are you understanding this? Are you getting these correct? And then you move on. So it's a rigorous process, just like if you were taking a college course.
As you mentioned, we're expecting this to be embedded in the college classes. When are we expecting that teachers or students who graduate with a teaching degree will have this incorporated in their graduation requirements? Is it a year or 2 or 3 or?
We'll see that several years down the road, which you'll also see today in educator effectiveness, to Superintendent Bocce's point, is that we are looking to align the praxis reading assessment to the science of reading. And so that will take a few years. So we'll see a shift in coursework that is already beginning. So we'll see students who graduate 3 years from now begin to graduate and be assessed with that praxis assessment that is aligned to the science of reading, and then they will be employed in our schools and in our school systems and have that in their tool belt as part of their coursework, and then there will be less of a need for ongoing science of reading training like we're seeing in math right now with our current teachers.
And did I hear you right? In about 3 years, the practice test will incorporate this. Thank you.
Other comments? I have something for you. On your slide 9, you're showing the progress. Could As you shared with us previously, we're on an upward trend right now, which is very encouraging. What do you attribute that improvement to?
I would attribute the improvement to an increased focus on kindergarten through second grade. I think we have been talking about K-2 assessment, K-2 accountability. We have really emphasized, as a Department of Education, the importance of early literacy. We have carved out our literacy team. We've done literacy office hours. We've produced literacy resources. It has been in the forefront of everything that we're doing. And likewise, our schools and school systems have really embraced that and become very committed to improvements in K-2 classrooms. I think prior to, schools and school systems were prioritizing testing grade levels and really thinking and working a lot with third on up. And I think our more recent conversations in the last few years about kindergarten through second grade has highlighted the importance and of that being a priority area. And we've seen it in our schools.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is an increased focus, an increased priority in grades K through 2, not specifically implementation of any programs, just a general overall improvement on focus in that K through 2 group.
Well, I think because if you recall, this particular data was the beginning of this past school year. So I think certainly during that year of COVID, we did offer some amount of literacy resources, literacy training. We did have some early adopters for science and reading training. I think this past school year, we saw even more. And so I would expect to see that in our results moving into next year as well.
Okay. Next question. Can you help me with the process through the continuum? So from kindergarten through 4th grade, if I'm a student going through that continuum, what are the checkpoints at every grade level to assess literacy? And you've spoken to tutoring, you've spoken to intervention and so forth. I get a better feel for that process. As a student moves from kindergarten to 1st grade and through that continuum, what are those checkpoints? When do those interventions come into play? What are those trigger points? And what happens to a child that is at a point of potential promotion? They don't have those literacy skills to be prepared for that next grade level. Can you talk me through that process?
Right now, I believe that very much depends on the school and school system as to what literacy assessment they are administering, how often. Our state requirement is just that it's administered in the first 30 days of school as of now. As that perhaps changes, we'll see the beginning, middle, and end of year, which is really ideal, is we have schools that are doing that beginning of year check, middle of year, and then end of year, and progress monitoring in between, using some sort of assessment to determine individual needs of students as they move from grade level to grade level. But that's very much dependent on the school and school system at this point in time. I will say you all approved in the last few months with our literacy policy, you all approved as part of the Pupil Progression Bulletin 1566 for our students in the 3rd grade who are identified as reading below grade level to have a literacy plan. And part of that literacy plan is a group convening and deciding with the parents involved, the family involved, and deciding whether it's best for that student to move into the 4th grade or to maybe stay in 3rd grade with additional supports or move into the 4th grade with really specific supports. So that's now part of our pupil progression policy, and it will be part of our school system's pupil progression policy, and we're helping them through what it will look like to develop those plans and implement them for those students who are maybe exiting 3rd grade and maybe repeating 3rd grade.
So what are your thoughts on implementing a similar policy at other grade levels?
I think it could be beneficial. I think it's about identifying students' individual needs at any point in time. There is no quick fix to literacy. There is no one program. There's no silver bullet to solving literacy anywhere. It's about identifying student-specific needs at any point in time and providing children exactly what they need according to that deficit that they're demonstrating. And that takes an effective educator who is skilled and trained in the science of reading to meet that student's needs. So that can look like a variety of different things from grade level to grade level. It could look like retention, it could look like promotion, but it should always look on addressing the individual needs of each individual child.
Superintendent, I'd be interested in a recommendation from your team with regard to policy considerations at those grade levels. In addition to what we have currently in place at third grade, to Dr. Jason's point, there's no silver bullet. And if we wait until the third grade and we're trying to play catch up at third grade because we didn't have those quality control points along the way, I just have a concern that we already going to be in need of a silver bullet, right? Because we get into that recycle mode again. So appreciate your thoughts on that.
Well, I will call out, there was a piece of legislation this past session that passed, which provides for progress monitoring or mandates progress monitoring throughout the course of the school year and multiple times, and presently that doesn't exist. Now, some more responsive systems do that, and then they intervene or extend based on the results of that progress monitoring. But this particular legislation would mandate progress monitoring, and so where we're going to have to make sure that we're stepping in, and I think we're already on track to do a lot of this, and certainly we'll be in a better position after the universal screener, is what do you do with the information? And like Dr. Boken mentioned, having even greater detail of data to know based on grade level, but also to know actual deficit, and then how do you intervene on actual deficits in real time throughout the year, not just at the end of the year once you know that there's a complication. So, this is a solid practice that is reinforced by legislation that will ultimately mandate into our classrooms, which we think is something that should be happening anyway. Not necessarily the mandate, but it should be happening, and so this mandate will force that.
So progress monitoring, is that something that your team will bring back to the board with a recommendation, and the board will have some discussion about how progress monitoring is defined, or how's that going to work?
Well, progress monitoring is simply an educational term where you are looking at specific points over the course of time to determine has the student made progress, has the student not made progress, and then if we're talking about literacy, you're then looking at what are the potential deficits. Does the student have a phonemic awareness issue? Do they have a fluency issue? And so what we're trying to build out, and we've actually released hundreds of interventions from our literacy team, is if the child has this particular deficit, these are the things that you should be considering doing to intervene. And so I don't necessarily know that we would be coming back with a policy around that, because we would be mandating the universal screener that would then provide the instrument that would be used over the course of the year.
So how do we manage those quality control points? If we have a progress monitor in place, how do we know that's triggering some follow-up? Like intervention or tutoring or whatever, how do we know that we're getting the action that we'd like to see to benefit students?
I mean, are you suggesting that systems would not respond to the information on the screener for individual kids? You're trying to make sure that we're forcing that response?
I just like to be comfortable that we have quality control points in place and we're not going to catch up in fourth grade.
I agree, and that's why, if you go to a school, there's seldom a school that I step into where they do not have a renewed commitment and energy around reading. I heard someone say the other day that nothing really has happened in literacy in 2 years, and I find that well, for one, laughable because of the work that I know is happening. I mean, I look in the audience now and I see system leaders, and I know what they're doing to invest in literacy. I see individuals who care deeply about conditions such as dyslexia and the work that they're doing. And I know that we have a renewed interest in literacy across our state. So we have these policies, we have these practices, we have to continue to refine them, and I'm certainly open to what that might look like. But do I have a response right now in terms of what are we going to do as a Department of Education or state board based on an individual student's progress monitoring after October or February? I don't have the answer to that right now, other than telling you that collectively there is a significant focus and a ton of work happening and resources being developed and available around our students.
Thank you. I'd just like to hear more about progress monitoring, next update we get, and what those trigger points are for intervention too. The literacy screener, there's been a lot of discussion in the last year and a half or so about the literacy screener. The procurement process is delayed and so forth. I had requested a copy of the RFP because I was curious about whether or not dyslexia was included in the RFP or not. Can you speak to that or not? Whether or not the screening process is going to include dyslexia and to what extent?
Detail.
So the literacy screener will include, to Dr. Rose's question earlier, it will include a full battery of literacy indicators so that one will be able to garner if a student is displaying characteristics of dyslexia. The thing about dyslexia is there's no one particular assessment that can say for certain that a child has dyslexia. And so we would look at data, multiple data points to determine if a child is displaying characteristics of dyslexia before that is actually determined for an individual child.
Thank you. Was any other comments, questions, Mr. Garber?
Yes, about the legislation that's passed. As you said, it requires testing 3 times a year. That testing, does the legislation designate what the test will be, or is that, I thought you said maybe that's going to be the screener that we decide on in a year or two?
Well, we will have that decision. The goal is for that screener to be in place by the beginning of the 23 school year.
And that will be the test that will be administered 3 times a year?
The screening, yes.
And the legislation allows CASI to dictate what test the locals will use?
I believe so, because that is the goal of the legislation in the previous year. And so this was an expansion of that legislation.
Okay. And is the test going to be given to all students, or just those that have been identified as behind?
No, it would be universally provided.
Thank you.
Last question. The 2023 screener rollout, does that satisfy the timeline for the legislation?
The legislation requires for the screening to take place. And so we have the ability to screen next year in the same way that we've screened in previous years. It would just be the individual school systems making the selection among the 4 options. And so we have satisfied that. We have to satisfy moving forward at some point the accountability piece around K2 as well. And so we feel like we're fine in terms of timeline on that as well.
So right now, we are in compliance with the law with regard to the literacy screener and the literacy requirements in that statute.
We need to have the screener in place. We are working with the Office of State Procurement to have that screener in place as quickly as we possibly can.
Members, any other comments? Mr. Carter?
I have one. With regard to the screener, we're hiring a vendor to develop that screener, correct?
Office of State Procurement is working to, with us to select the vendor that would provide the screener.
What's the estimate for when that will be identified, the vendor will be identified?
I don't know.
By August?
Hi, Office of State Procurement has the application itself in a pre-review process right now. That can take up to it can take 2 months at least. We anticipate that being done in the next 2 months. We're working very closely with them to make sure that we don't have any delays as they ask questions back and forth. From there, it goes out for bid, and we are optimistic that we can bring this back in December. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other comments? Thank you, Dr. Chason. Members, we have a motion on the floor to receive this report. Do we have any public comment? No public comment. Is there any exception to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 71, item 5.1, consideration of Frontfield approvals. Recommendations to grant approvals to Episcopal School of Acadiana, St. Martin Parish, Reach Institute, Lafayette Parish, St. Stephen Early Learning Center, and St. Mary.
So moved.
Dr. Bowman, and a second. Dr. Davis, thank you. Is there any conversation? Public comments? Exception to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item.
On page 72, item 5.2, consideration of non-public school academic classifications. Recommendation is to approve the non-public classifications as outlined for Episcopal School of Acadiana, St. Martin, Reach Institute, Smothers Academy, and St. Stephen's Early Learning Center.
Get a motion. Dr. Bowman, and a second. Dr. Davis. Is there any discussion on this item? Public comment? Exception to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 73, item 6.1, consideration of an update report regarding the Accountability Council. The recommendations are to receive the minutes of the May 9th meeting, approve the appointments of Karen Lawless and Julian Holly to the council, and ratify the appointment of Dr. Patty Glazer to serve as chair of the council.
Superintendent? Members, do we have any comments? Public comment? Hearing none. Exceptions to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item.
On page 83, item 6.4, consideration of an update report regarding continuous learning and remote attendance policy. The recommendation is to receive the report.
So moved.
And a second. Ms. Ellis, thank you. Do we have any comments from the board?
Just briefly, Mr. Morris. This is related to continuous learning and remote instruction. I know this is an area where the board has been very interested over the last year. We are still working with stakeholders on this particular item to get additional feedback, and our intent would be that we would come back to you in August with policy around continuous learning and remote attendance.
Thank you, Superintendent. Do we have any comments for Mr. Gardner?
Yeah, a question for the superintendent. This was a relatively hot topic at the SAC committee. I would assume that we are intently listening to the problems that those superintendents raised and trying to work with them to come to some mutually agreeable set of rules and standards that can be used to make sure that active learning is happening during these days off.
Right, and that's the rationale for the delay, so we can spend additional time with the system leaders talking about this particular issue and come forward with policy that is more mutually agreed upon.
Sounds good, thank you.
Other comments? Public comment for do we have any exception to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
Page 85, item 7.1, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 111, the Louisiana School District and State Accountability Systems regarding the Innovative Assessment Program. Recommendation is to approve the revisions as noticed in the team.
Motion is Holloway, second Mr. Garvey. Comments from the board?
I have questions. Is there public comment on this one first? No? Okay. And then I have questions for the department. Do you want to start with a description of what this one's about?
Sure, there are two components to this. The first is renaming the program from the Humanities Pilot. Originally, when this was developed, it was going to be a social studies and ELA through course assessment. Over time, the social studies component was removed and it became an ELA assessment that was going to be through course. This changes the name of that pilot from Humanities to the Innovative Assessment Pilot Program. The second is, as we were preparing to go to the Department of Education to do an amendment to our ESSA plan, we reached out to them with what our policy was that was adopted in 2019, and they shared with us that there was no way to not use the innovative assessment results in our accountability system. And whatever we did for those schools, we would have to do for every school, leaving us with very limited options on what to do. And as a result, we are bringing revisions to remove the hold harmless component of the policy, which the department had done in the past prior to our accountability system being part of ESSA. And under ESSA, we have much fewer flexibilities on how we use our accountability system, particularly around when we substitute different assessment requirements for different schools.
So I have some concerns about making these changes and the impact that has on this particular pilot, but also pilots in the future. I really struggle with this. So it leads me to question what the consequences would be.
There could be pretty significant consequences from the U.S. Department of Education. As you know, most of what the Department of Education has control over is funding. I'd imagine that we would get a letter telling us that we can't do this, we should not do this, and the consequences they would have to enumerate.
Has anybody else done this before?
Not to my knowledge.
I just can't, I just really struggle with this because, you talked about the 2019 policy. I think because of being on the board at that time and making a commitment to a group of schools and districts to do something, to go back on that, I feel like if somebody's gonna suffer the consequences, it should be us, that those consequences shouldn't be trickling down. And so I would like to offer a substitute motion to defer on this because I feel like we really have to go back and figure out, what are the consequences to schools and districts? How does that impact us in the long run? Because how do we get anybody to come on board with trying new things if they feel like they can't trust us in the long run to take the hits, that we're gonna pass the hits on to them. So I really struggle with this, and I think we need to spend some more time talking about it and figuring out what we can do to maybe absorb some of the consequences and not pass them on.
I can tell you that one consequence certainly would be that we would not be able to innovate in these ways in the future. The authority under which we are doing this innovative assessment is a very specific IADA authority that the Fed selected us out of a handful of SEAs in the country. I don't have the exact number, but it's fewer than 10 in order to do this pilot. So I would imagine that at a minimum, one of those would be that we wouldn't be allowed to participate in this pilot program for innovative assessments in the future.
So I hear what you're saying. I guess my concern is, would any districts participate in a pilot with us in the future anyway? If they feel like the hits are gonna just roll down to them.
Our expectation around this assessment is that, and the requirement for participating in the IADA is that it be a comparable assessment, that if a student took the traditional 8th grade or 7th grade LEAP test in ELA, they would get the same result that they would have gotten, that if they would have been mastering on one test, they would be mastering the other test. The requirement is that it would be comparable, so the risk is relatively low in that way, because the test is supposed to be comparable. It has anchor items linked across in order to ensure that the student's result is consistent regardless of which test they took.
So then why would the feds have such a strong opinion of it?
Because the IADA law requires that we use, or the IADA, the law that grants us the authority to do the IADA requires us to utilize that assessment for that student's results, because we are saying that it is the lead test. And by participating in that pilot, we are saying that we will use those results in accountability, because it is the lead test for those students. We also went down the path of asking the Department of Ed if we opted to allow a school system to take both tests and take the higher of those two results. They said no. Once the school system opted into the IADA, we were required to use the innovative assessment results. We went back and forth with them with a few different options, and their final outcome was that you have to use these results this year for the schools that participated in the IADA pilot. The only other alternatives would include doing something statewide. For example, we could blend 2 years worth of data together. So for example, we could say 50% of the ELA component statewide would be the 2021 results, and 50% would be the 2022 results, but everyone would have to be measured the same way. That does not seem like an option that would be good, given the results of the 2021 school year were not results that we use in accountability, so there aren't really good options that would allow us to mitigate for one group of schools. To allow them to take the higher of the two is not an option.
I can't get behind this option. I would like to offer substitute motion to defer on this item. And I just would hope that we can figure out a solution that would work for them, but also work for us, and not have us rolling consequences down.
Mr. Langford, what if any potential consequences could it be to defer this motion?
I think that if we defer it and it comes back in August, it would have to be adopted by emergency rules so that we can make sure that our results can be rolled out consistent with law and policy. And then as far as federal consequences, I don't have those immediately available, but we can find out. The issue with the federal consequences would be they would most likely happen after we have released scores, so we would have to make this decision before we release the scores. Does that make sense?
I just want to know, if we defer it until August, I want to feel comfortable that the board understands what the risks are, and we give careful consideration of what those risks are. So what I'm hearing from you is that if we defer until August, then the risks, if you understand them, are minimal, and we can still address any of those risks with emergency action.
It could also, I'd have to get with the team, we could report back on this. Could we defer this to the full board meeting, or would we be delaying this to August?
Do you feel like you can come up with a better solution than what you have here before the full board meeting?
I think we could come up with a strong list of consequences that we could share at the full board meeting.
Well, I'd like to defer to August then.
Second.
Mrs. Gordon?
Yeah. If Ms. Boatby's motion to defer till August carries, you will still have time to bring back tomorrow a list of potential consequences, right?
I'd have to defer to
August.
how it were to add it to the agenda, et cetera.
We just pull the items
Yes.
and let you speak on it.
Got it.
What's the downside of deferring till tomorrow?
You'd have to ask Ms. Boatby.
I don't have confidence that we're gonna have anything better than what we have here. Instead, we're just gonna have a list of things that the feds might do to us. That doesn't, I really, the feds might do a lot of things to us. The question is, what are the potential solutions? So my hope is between now and August, he can get back on the phone with the feds and say, you know what, this really doesn't work for Louisiana, and we don't want to pass the consequences down to our district. Why don't you help us become creative and figure out another solution?
And in the interim between now and the tests have already been taken. So we're waiting on results. How we score them, really, nothing will change between now and August. We can score them one way or we can score them a different way. So I don't see any reason why we can't wait possibly and have further discussion with the feds, as Dr. Boat is asking, because it's not going to impact, I don't think, our calculation of scores, because it can be calculated both ways internally while we're waiting for further discussion and possible solutions. So I don't think there's any negative effects on waiting. At least I don't see any unless somebody can point that out. I have one question though, and then I'll let other people speak about this. I was unaware, and I'm not in this pilot, but I was unaware, and maybe that's just me not paying attention, but it started out as a humanities project where it was social studies and ELA. Social studies was supposed to be the content and ELA processes and such. A statement you made at the very beginning, you said that the social studies piece is no longer in it, it's for the ELA component. Are you saying to me then, are the pilot districts, did they have their children then take both this assessment and the social studies assessment this year?
That's correct.
Okay. So what we're looking at as a potential either or here is their ELA score. Because the social studies score, they took the test and that's what the kids are going to get in social studies. Whereas what we're looking at now is how do we evaluate this pilot as either their ELA score for 2021 or go back to if they get a higher score than prior, I guess, 2019 years. Is that what we're looking at? As we're trying to make a decision
Do we
about.
use the 2022 scores or the 2021 scores?
So we would use the 2021 scores that are just simulated scores.
I think we would have to, the policy says the pre-AI prior to the pilot. We have to get with council to determine whether the board, whether the calling them simulated SPS would keep us from using 2021, or what the policy would actually say, whether we would have to use 2019 and go back 3 years.
So if we're talking about using either the 2022 score or we're not sure yet if it's 2021 simulated or 2019 actual, or whatever we're going to use the phrase. But we're going to use social studies because they took that no matter what.
That's correct.
So again, just my last comment on this, I mean, we have all the scores in place, all the tests in the table. However we count it or calculate it, we can still do it all these different ways. So I don't see a downside of deferring it until August if we can try to have more discussion. And, you know, I know y'all can be very, very persuasive, Mr. Lambert and Dr. Brumley, maybe we can have some dialogue with the feds so that, and I think Dr. Popey's point is well taken. When you enter into a pilot and you're told that this is going to happen, the trust level as to what happens has to be there. It's just like when we, and I hate to bring up this side bar, but when we talk about emerging from CIR and UIR based on 2021 scores, we initially wanted the impression if it was beneficial and you could emerge, then we would come out of UIR and CIR. And then we were told later on that because of the Fed's ruling, we have to use it or not use it. You can't do it if it helps you only. So sometimes policy that maybe we put forth and what we promised to people, and this was prior to y'all being here, I understand, but this should have been vetted when we did this back in 2019 so that we didn't tell districts something that turned out not to be accurate now that we're sitting here in 2022. So I don't see any downside to deferring it when we have the scores already in place. Won't change any testing that the kids are taking.
Superintendent Brown?
I was just going to offer that if we're going to have additional conversations with the Fed around this, that's not happening today. So that would have to be an August situation. But I do also want to acknowledge that Mr. Lambert had been in conversation with them already. It's not as if he hasn't. But certainly if you want additional conversation for us to look at potential solutions, we can't do that today. That would have to be August.
Dr. Davis?
So have we ever done an innovative program in the past, like science or something where we have been through this process before and the feds have allowed us to have this same rule in place? Like what we thought we could do? What did we do when we changed this? We had the science changes. People who were here, Holly? Do you remember?
They did the higher of the two.
They did the higher of the two. And so why was that okay then and not okay now?
I was not here. I would have to go and review and see if we were sent any communication on that. However, the U.S. Department of Ed was very, very clear with us about this not being permissible.
Well, I guess I would.
I don't remember sending any money back, Dr. Davis, I can tell you that much. And I mean, they might write us a letter. I'd be curious to know what exactly they would do, but I just don't feel like, because we get this one opinion, that then our schools and our districts suffer as a result, because I think the consequences for us relative to future pilots are really high. And so that's why I think we need to have a conversation about what the consequences really are. And I don't remember sending any money back, Dr. Davis.
And are you saying in 2019 we didn't submit this to ESSER to see if it would be allowable? Is that what you're telling us?
Not to our knowledge, we've not been able to find that. It's also not mentioned in the original application to participate in the innovative assessment.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, do we have a second? Dr. Davis?
I will second it, but I would also like to say that I don't understand why it would not be possible for us, even if we have to report to the feds according to their rule, when we calculate letter grades for them, why it would not be possible for us to give those districts 2 letter grades even, right? That one that reflected our promise to them, and that we put the weight behind the public, like this is the one that we think that the public ought to be weighing. Like I guess, you know, I would like to know kind of how exactly the federal government regulates what we do on our own state report cards, and if that would be an option for us as well.
We could definitely look into that. I would say that one of the things that school systems will care a great deal about is what will be the impact on their intervention status, which is linked to letter grades. So there could be a world where if what you're suggesting is permissible, where the letter grade says one thing on the report card, but they would wind up in intervention status as a result of the other letter grade, that might be, it would just be a place where there would be inconsistency, and the school system would have to still wind up in intervention status because the feds require us to use what we reported to them as the intervention focus.
Yet a little more palatable than what I'm reading here. A couple of things. One, and I'm sorry, Mr. Morris, I didn't get your permission to speak. One, if you're not already connected to the other states that are doing the assessment pilot, I would encourage you to get connected to them. Because I'm imagining this is not just an issue for us, and sometimes talking to the feds with a group of states is easier than talking to the feds by ourselves. So I'd encourage that. Two, is that I'd love for you to come up with a solution that doesn't even require policy change and, you know, doesn't even have to come back to the board. I was very careful to think about deferring this item as to flat out reject it, because I don't want to make your conversations with the Fed, more difficult. I know that I'm doing that, but I know a flat out rejection would have been a different situation. So I think by deferring it is saying, please go have those conversations with groups of states, and if there's an area that you can come to where it's not, where we can absorb some of this shock, I think is what we should be doing.
I wanted to add, Shannon Davis, Executive Director, that I believe what we did for science was up for the state letter grades that you explained, and we still sent in the CI or you brought up for the feds.
I would have to confirm.
I think that's what we did, if I recall, but I'm not the expert, so.
Thank you. Good discussion, members. So we have a motion on the floor, and a motion to defer this item. We have a second. Do we have any exception to the motion? Hearing no exception, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 87, item 7.2, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 135, Health and Safety regarding meningococcal disease information as outlined in state statute. Recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
Dr. Davis, do I have a second? Ms. Ellis, thank you. Is there any comment from the board?
Just one comment, Mr. Morris. In 2018, the legislature passed a law relative to this, and when it was transferred into VESI policy, whether it was intentional, which is fine, or inadvertent, I don't know, but what was omitted and not included in VESI policy is the opportunities for parents to do exemptions from the vaccine. And so all this is doing is coming back around and adding that into our policy that exemptions are allowable for the vaccine, which was part of the legislation that passed in 2018.
Thank you for that clarification. Members, any other comments? Other comments? Hearing none, any exception to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 89, item 7.3, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 137, Louisiana Early Learning Center licensing regulations regarding usable indoor space. Recommendation is to approve the revisions as notice of intent.
Mr. Rock, any second? Ms. Holloway? Lieutenant Rock? Any members' comments? Public comments? Hearing none. Any exception to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 91, item 7.4, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 139, Louisiana Child Care and Development Fund programs regarding early childhood tracks for early learning centers and family child care providers. Recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
Can I get a motion? Ms. Holloway, second, Mr. Garvey. Superintendent, here. Members' comments? Public comment cards? Exception to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 106, item 7.5, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 140, Louisiana Early Childhood Care and Education Network regarding the Early Childhood Education Fund. Recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
Mr. Rock, second. Dr. Davis. Superintendent. Members' comments? Public comment cards? Exceptions to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 108, item 7.6, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 741, non-public, Louisiana Handbook for Non-Public School Administrators regarding accreditation. Recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
Motion, please. Mr. Garvey, second. Ms. Holloway.
Just a question.
Ms. O'Shea.
What does this change mean? What is the regionally accredited versus accredited in accordance with 34 CFR 602?
Yeah, it's quite technical, Superintendent Boucher, but basically what it does is it aligns language here with what is essentially required in the federal code, the code of federal regulations. So it's just an alignment of terminology, Louisiana versus what's required in the federal code.
So what we're saying is any college or university getting a bachelor's degree from any institution which is accredited under this federal section is what we're looking for now? I mean, is that what that change means?
Well, again, it just makes our language here in our state comply with what the federal language is.
So is that putting more institutions on our list or fewer institutions on our list?
I don't know the answer to that. Previously it was regionally accredited, and now it's the federal terminology is which are accredited.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any other comments from the board? Any public comment? Exception to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
On page 122, item 8.2, consideration of an update report regarding school safety requirements and potential areas for improvement. Recommendation is to receive the report.
Motion, Ms. Holloway, second, Mr. Garwood. Superintendent?
Yes, sir, this is an item Mr. Mellorine asked just to be placed on the agenda, just to add additional focus. We're all aware of some of the recent events, unfortunate events relative to school safety. What that has prompted is additional discussions federally and also within our state and with our systems around student safety, which is our most important responsibility as educators. We just wanted to call out that right now that there is a law requiring school systems to develop a school safety plan. Many school systems around the state practice with their local law enforcement, with their first responders, with their staff around those particular safety plans. During this legislative session, there were 2 resolutions that were passed in the legislature, House Resolution 208, which requests each public school principal to conduct quarterly safety drills addressing the scenario of an active shooter on campus. And then House Resolution 218 that requests the State Department of Education to study school safety issues and submit a written report to the House Committee on Education. I can tell you that 2 weeks ago, our agency convened over 100 system leaders. We brought in an expert in the area of school safety as a refresher around some of the most important items with safety. I know that recently I attended a school safety summit here in Baton Rouge that was a collaboration between the state police and the EBR school system, and individuals attended that. We're going to be coming out with additional information on our office in the very near future about some additional opportunities. But what whenever I've been asked about school safety over the last couple of weeks, a few things I think matter for school systems, and this is what I shared at the Safety Summit. This is what I shared with superintendents when we had our meeting a couple of weeks ago. There are some things that are important. I think the first thing that is super important is creating environments at your schools where students in those schools feel comfortable in speaking up and saying something if they recognize that something doesn't look right, feel right, seem right, they see a social media post that is concerning, building relationships within students and adults so that the students who are in tune with their peers, they are in tune with what's going on within their school community, feel comfortable in speaking up and saying something. And that doesn't have to be a public announcement. That can be an anonymous conversation between the student and teacher, but there has to be an environment at the school where they feel comfortable in doing that. If you look at an FBI study of about a decade of instances of school violence, school shootings, over 75% of those issues, someone knew that something could happen and did not notify someone to alert them. And so just creating environments in schools where students feel comfortable having an adult that they can go tell is really important. I think the next thing that's really important is access control. So hardening the perimeters of our school facilities, creating single points of entry, double doors where individuals can't come into the school and then proceed through all of the various wings of the school without being initially collected at that front entrance, making sure those perimeter doors are all secured. And this is a challenge in our state because many of our schools are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, and they weren't built in the same way that we would build a school today for safety and hurricanes and all the other issues. And so it is a challenge, but I think that we have to move towards more and more single points of entry, double doors, hardened perimeter. The next thing is mental health issues and making sure that we continue to provide counselors and social workers for those particular issues. And we have made investments. I appreciate the work of this board, particularly with our stimulus dollars. We have made significant investments in mental health. I know our local school systems are doing the same, so making sure that students have access to that. And then the last thing that I've tried to communicate is just the importance of training between local schools, local school systems, and our law enforcement communities their fire departments, their EMS departments, and making sure that that training is happening routinely. So we will be coming back to the board with additional information moving forward, but the system leaders that I have visited with certainly are interested in continuing to make improvements and have been engaged in collaboration around some of these key issues. And so there wasn't a per se presentation around this, Mr. Morris, today. It was just Mr. Mellering, and I think others probably felt it was important to at least call it out and to recognize that it is our most important responsibility as educators to keep our kids safe every day.
Thank you, Superintendent. Superintendent Boccia.
And what Dr. Brumley was talking about in terms of preventative measures is extremely important. But I'd like to also put on the radar and maybe as a suggestion for whatever group you have is looking at this. A few years ago in St. Bernard Parish, as a result of one of these incidents that seems to continue to occur over the years, we worked with the LSU Stevenson Disaster Management Institute. And they came into St. Bernard Parish. We worked with our local OEP director, all of the agencies, first responders, and the whole ball of wax, and developed and updated emergency management crisis plans to react to active shooters and every other type that you can imagine. We had points, I hate to bring these things up, but with local law enforcement where they would place law enforcement individuals, where we have reunification centers, how we move kids from one place to another, and how we communicate. When COVID occurred and the pandemic issues came up, we knew that within our emergency and crisis plans, we also had to, in the continuous improvement plans that we talked about, had to address those issues. So at the beginning of last school year, before this horrible incident in Texas, we recontracted with LSU Stevenson Disaster Management Institute, and it's run by ex-military people. Colonel Brand is in charge of this. And they're updating with us our plans as we speak, and we've been doing this for several months. They'll come on, they have all the blueprints, they do the walkthroughs. We have set up with all of the local responders and just every agency available within the parish of how to handle each one of these situations. There are also apps that we are then going to be putting on. For example, when something happens, all of the teachers in the school, an app immediately goes to their cell phones, and it's programmed as to who gets notified of what things at what time. So it's extending that far down. The LSU Disaster Management Institute has had discussions now with GOSEP at the state level to use what they're doing with us, and we started this several months ago, as a pilot to look at the templates they're using and potentially to look at how this would apply and could apply to other school systems. So we're right in the middle of it. In fact, this past week, they are meeting with our individual teams, and we're culminating the whole effort in July. And we're doing a big presentation to our board and community. So that is an avenue where we do have to do things on the preventative side first, but we also need to have maybe a few more sophisticated plans in place that encompass all of your local agencies. And if it's coordinated through, I guess, one place within our state, with LSU people working with GOSEP, it might be an avenue for really good emergency crisis management plans. So I'd ask that if you wish, to explore that, that could be a component of what we're talking about.
Definitely sounds like a best practice. Superintendent, what I'm hearing is Superintendent Boccia would like to see your team to follow up on that one and what we could potentially do to share that best practice with other systems as that model gets finalized. Mr. Gardner.
Yes, as you mentioned, Mr. Miller has decided to be put on the agenda and he isn't here. Superintendent mentioned a report that he's working on for the legislature that was required by them. And a couple of other new things that may be coming soon, I think the superintendent mentioned. With all of that in mind, I'd like to offer a substitute motion that we receive this report and put this back on the agenda for August. So Mr. Miller can have time to directly address this. If anything new happens with respect to the report or other items, we can hear about it in August. So I'd like to offer that substitute motion. If I could get a second, that'd be great.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Any other comments from the board?
I just want to thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to be more precise, thank you, Mr. Chair. What specifically should come back, right? I mean, I think we've had a high-level conversation. Superintendent Boucher offered an incredible roadmap and a playbook for what this could look like a comprehensive safety plan. I'd like data. I'd like to know what districts have that caliber plan already, which ones don't, where might the support be needed to help them address that plan. I think we need to be looking at something more comprehensive of the current state of affairs. This feels like an urgent issue. This feels like not something we should just sort of leisurely address at the next meeting, but rather really understand what the current state is so that we are doing all that we can, using all of the tools within our disposal to really ensure that our schools and our systems feel like they have the support they need to be safe right now.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. So we have a motion on the floor now. Ready to motion to defer this to next meeting with an update from Mr. Mallory. Is there any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
The last item will be on page 36, item 3.1. Consideration of an update report regarding the accountability work group / study group. Recommendation is to receive the report.
Motion. Ms. Marshall, the second. Mr. Garvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sure. Thank you.
No, I was just saying, I think Ms. Orange Jones is leading this presentation.
Yes, you might be getting somebody else to make a motion.
Oh, yeah. I would just take mine.
Dr. Bowman. Thank you. Ms. Marshall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, board members. Just a quick update on the current work and the progressing work of the work group. In August, you all will recall that Bessie formed a study group to explore how the state measures values and rewards growth in the accountability formula. Subsequently, the board expanded the role of the study group to study the entirety of Louisiana's K-12 system, accountability system, and provide Bessie with considerations for adopting changes to the state's accountability formula. The study group identified a purpose for our accountability system to frame our discussions. It should, and you can read above, improve student academic achievement by recognizing the opportunities provided for students by focusing on student academic growth and measurable outcomes, provide a fair assessment of performance for the purposes of communication, and prioritizing resources, energy, and interventions on schools in need of improvement. Just a couple of notes about our process. In the fall and winter, we focused on building a deeper understanding of how the existing system works. In the spring, there was a deep focus on how growth is measured, how high schools are assessed, and the causes of high school scores being higher than elementary scores. Today is just a very brief update, and the report includes a set of next steps that the study group is asking the department to engage in between this meeting and August, when we will bring the full report forward. The study group identified 4 key goals. Ensure the results are clear and easy to understand. Strengthen the system's growth component so that growth is incentivized and rewarded. Modify high school accountability so it better reflects college and career readiness standards and is aligned with 3.8. And maintain Louisiana's proficiency standards. At a high level, we've identified some ways to solve all 4 of those goals, and we'll be seeking stakeholder engagement. By we, I mean specifically the work group has charged the department spend the next month engaging deeply stakeholders in pursuit of finding meaningful solutions to the 4 goals that we've aforementioned. That will include small group engagements with representing schools, districts, and systems, professional organizations, community members, parents, and other stakeholders. We would expect that these proposals will shift as the barriers continue to be explored, additional ideas from the field are explored, and other considerations are considered from stakeholders. I will now defer to Mr. Lambert if there's anything else additionally that you'd like to add. And I want to just take a moment before you do, just thank the other members of the work group for your engagement the past several months. I know that we are far from over. I want to thank the department and certainly Mr. Lambert for all of your efforts as well. I know we are about to enter the next stage, which is meaningful stakeholder engagement, and that is a significant lift. But if there's anything more you'd like to add to this report, please do.
I think you captured it pretty well for us. We've already started doing stakeholder engagement. We've been talking with folks throughout this process. Teacher Leader Summit, I think we talked to 13 superintendents. We emailed all of them, offered time. Anyone that we did not get to meet with, that didn't reach out to us, we followed up with them. We'll continue to do that. Dr. Brumley and I are excited to go and talk with folks about the different ways to solve the challenges that the study group identified, and acknowledge that this is going to be a process where we go through and we look at many different ways to do those 4 things, including making sure the results are clear and easy to understand, strengthening the growth component, how do we modify high school accountability so that it is reflective of college and career readiness standards and aligned with 3 through 8, and of course maintaining our proficiency standard, which is mastery.
Thank you. Any questions from the rest of the board?
Members, Mr. Castillo.
I take, again, thank you to the work group that worked on this and staff. I take it from your comments, Ms. Morris-Jones, we're far from over. There's quite a bit of work that needs to be done in terms of stakeholder engagement. My understanding is that there's something that's supposed to be on the agenda for August. So we expect to take some action in August, or we're going to kind of gauge how the stakeholder engagement goes before making that decision.
Sure, let's go back to the process slide for just 1 second, just as a reminder. So we'll see here that we launched the study group and, have spent the larger part of the spring and into the summer, continuing to engage as a group. And according to this and the initial direction of Bessie, by August, the department should be bringing back a set of recommendations for us to consider. What we discussed as a work group, and feel free any other work group members to speak to this, since we have had a robust discussion about it, is if it takes longer than then we should acknowledge that then the department would likely bring back a set of, directions for us that say they need more time based on how engagement goes. But the initial timeline was such that by August at the latest, we'd be looking at recommendations. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Dr. Brumley or Mr. Langford, about timeline?
Other comments from members?
Are we gonna get farther into the presentation?
This is the presentation. This is the update for today.
Okay, so you guys aren't gonna walk through the recommendations that were in our packet?
We can, if you'd like to.
Well, I'm trying to figure out the best place to plug in. If we go to the identify key goals, so you're on that slide before. I was able to watch the Superintendent Advisory Council meeting, not live, of course, but was able to watch that, was able to attend a session at Teacher Leader, so have a little bit of an idea of what some of the recommendations are. I guess one of the struggles that I have with this is the alignment piece. So if we look at the 3rd bullet, modify high school accountability so it better reflects college and career readiness standards and is in alignment with 3.8, right? So I would say that's probably where most of my constituents' phone calls are connected to. But I also just go back to when we first created the current accountability system, and I'm gonna have to have some help because I already told you guys I really struggle with time. I think ESSA was passed in December of 2015, not 100% sure, but I think it was December of 2015, and then that would have put us in in 2016 working on the plan. And then we got the first year of data in 18-19. Is all this correct so far? As best you guys know. When we were having those conversations, we didn't set out to say, we want to make sure that the scores for the high schools look like the scores for the elementary and middle schools. Like it wasn't a goal in the design. I think the questions were more around, wow, the federal government is encouraging growth. It's like the first time that it was a conversation. Now we talked about growth for the teacher evaluations and VAM, so we had some of those mechanisms in place. But even when you think about our tests, because I know one of the things that you guys have uncovered through the work group is that the tests we have are not tests that distinguish growth, as well as maybe other tests that are available. But when those tests, when choices were made for those tests, which even precedes my time on this board, and I think that just goes to show you how long all these things take, right? Like, we did the Jumpstart 2.0 stuff in March of 2020, and like, I'm still waiting to be fully on Jumpstart 2.0, so I don't have to deal with all the 1.0 documents. It's just the transition times are so far. And so in the conversations for the model as we have now, I don't remember that being a priority. And I think introducing it now creates a challenge, right? Like, I think that's why the stakeholder input is where it is. So I will tell you that's just been the theme of the things that I'm hearing. And I'll be interested to see the feedback that you guys get in the coming months and where they land. I know like this all started with the growth, the push on growth and thinking about how we might add growth in the system. And you guys have encountered some things with the growth, namely our test, as I understand it. And so I guess, how feasible is it by August that we even end up with some recommendations around growth?
We're meeting with the organization that leads our test advisory council, or technical advisory council for the test. We're meeting with them on Friday to discuss what that might look like, and what a reasonable timeline would be to implement all of the changes, and all of the things that will need to be done. So we'll have an update on that at the August meeting, of course, with the solutions, but we're working with the chair of the group to figure out the courses there. There are a lot of options that we have, and we just need to decide exactly which options we think are the ones that we can do the quickest, that are also the best.
So when you're getting this, I guess there's a question around then what's the step in between to communicate out what you hear at that meeting in terms of what those possibilities are to the rest of us, because the board doesn't meet again until August. And I know the stakeholder groups are really interested. So it'd be helpful to know how you plan on communicating that piece out.
The study group anticipates meeting during the summer as we're getting feedback and working through this process. I think both of these are like...
The one on the other side seems to have worked better for people today.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, that's better.
The study group anticipates meeting throughout the summer as we've gotten feedback from folks discussing what potential changes to the simulation, what decision points need to be made as we bring this back, and we'll bring the growth component as a component of that conversation.
I'm told all personal vacations are on hold.
I'd like to, and if I might just follow Mr. Chair on that too, as a reminder, the work group meetings are public meetings. Streamlined, I don't know if you've been able to see any of those yet, Dr. Boki, but they are streamed and available should the public want to engage in the future ones or have a record of the past ones where we've had in-depth conversations about all of these topics.
Yes, it sounds like your meeting on Friday would be a pretty important one. Would it be possible for you to summarize what you find out on Friday and email that out to BESI members, and maybe copy our BESI executive director so she can post it somewhere so that the public has it before the next study group convenes again as needed happens? Thank you.
Other comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
A couple questions for clarification on the stakeholder engagement. the Accountability Council doesn't meet until August 29th. Is it possible to work with that group to move that meeting so that they can have some engagement prior to August message?
We anticipate doing that, yes.
Okay, thank you. Next question. The Superintendent's Advisory Council, July 28th. Help me understand the process for preparing that agenda.
So the process for preparing the agenda is any items that the board refers to the council formally at a board meeting, which would be this meeting, which is, or any other previous meeting. And then, once we have those items, if any, the department can add items as they would like to have feedback. And so that's basically the flow.
So in order to get the accountability item on the July meeting agenda, we need a motion from this board, or we just need to ask that it be done, or?
You can just ask the department to have that item.
Okay, just want to make sure we get it on the agenda. Thank you. That's all I have. Other members, comments? Public comments. We have 2 public comment cards. First one, Mr. William Kennedy wishes to speak. Mr. Kennedy? And on deck, I have Mr. Gordon Ford. Those are the only 2 cards I have.
Good afternoon, board. You all have a lot of responsibilities in making decisions that not only affect the education of the kids, but it affects kids' lives. And it affects the livelihoods of educators as well. One of my biggest concerns is that to take the time to make sure we get it right. I did speak at the last investment work group, and that was one thing that I indicated. Change is difficult, but constant change is impossible. So the timeliness of getting this done by August, I also question that myself. But I simply ask to take the time, work through it. I'm anxious to see the comments, the true engagement over the next couple of months, and really engage with educators, and let's get the changes right. I'm not opposed to accountability, and I believe there should be changes, okay? But I also believe that the system ought to be equitable and accessible by all. Now, I'm from Claiborne Parish, which is in rural North Louisiana, okay? The situation in Claiborne Parish is not necessarily the same as it would be in St. Bernard or any other parish. But I would like to speak on a couple of issues that I have, specifically for Claiborne Parish. On the part for strength of diploma, I have a hard time, for my kids' sake, of grasping the fact that a diploma is valued at 0 points. We have a particular program that we recover dropouts. Most of those kids are kids that have already counted as a 0 in accountability. But we put a program in place to try to help those kids get a diploma. Okay? We managed to graduate 7 2 weeks ago out of that program. Kids that had counted as dropouts. And if you don't think getting a diploma is something that is important to kids and to parents and to a community, you need to attend a program such as that. That is life-changing for those kids. One of those children was accepted to South Arkansas University to start working on her continuing education. Through our program, she was able to get a diploma and move on in that. So I believe the value of the diploma is worth something, certainly more than 0 points. Part of my concern, and I've had several conversations with the work group with Mr. Lambert professionally, of the concerns that we have. In rural Claiborne Parish, I do not have access to a technical school or a university within the parish. Our closest technical school is in a neighboring parish. It's about an hour from 2 of my schools, about 35 minutes from one. I can send kids there, I bus kids there. Okay, we provide the transportation. I serve a population that's about 85% economically disadvantaged. So we pay for dual enrollment. The district pays for the district dual enrollment. We pay for the books, we pay for the transportation, we pay the tuition. I get roughly $39,000 in SCA funds that is used to support dual enrollment. Okay? I can send a kid to technical school, and I can get that kid through 2 years or two terms and get a welding certificate level 2. Not NCCR level 2, but level 2. That kid can walk out and can go get a job, okay? Now, under our accountability system, that's only a basic credential. That's worth 50 points. He can walk out and truly get a job. He has a skill in clay repairs where he can go get a job as a welder. Now, to get him to an advanced degree, he would have to complete 45 hours at that technical school. That costs me roughly $9,000 in tuition for one job. Now back up, I get $39,000 in SCA funds to use for dual enrollment. That one job, to get him to a, on here it'd be the 100, an advanced credential. To get him to the advanced credential, it will cost me roughly $9,000, just in tuition. That's not supplies, that's not transportation, that's not anything else, okay? Now I venture to say this, that child this year that graduated with a high school diploma and a level 2 welder certificate, not the advanced, just the basic, he can go get a job. I did have 3 that graduated this year with an associate's degree. On this new scale, those children would get 125 points. I would venture to say that child that has the associate degree in general studies and that child that has a welding, this one's valued at 50 and this one's valued at 125. This child can't go get a job tomorrow. This child valued at 50 can. Several years ago, there was a push to really focus on Jumpstart. And we need to do a better job in Clayton Parish of doing that. So, in order to do that, it requires money. Okay, it requires effort. So, for my children to have a fair shot, there needs to be some adjustment on the strength of the diploma or an influx of revenue that can help to support that. The second concern I had is the timeliness. I do look forward, yes, I'll wrap up. I look forward to the engagement over the next couple of months. I have a number of issues. Mr. Lambert knows most all of them. If you can visit with me, you can visit with him and find out my issues as far as Clayton Parish is concerned. I would also like to go on record on behalf of my neighboring districts, Ms. Christy Fine in Union Parish, William Wysinger in Gamble, and Johnny Rowland in Webster, who all 3 border me. Arkansas borders me on the north. Each of them were unable to be here today, but they have each asked that I go on the record of expressing that they likewise have concerns with different portions and are excited to engage in true, meaningful conversation as we move forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Superintendent. Mr. Moore. How about Mr. Sheldon Jones on that?
Good morning, Gordon Ford, Executive Director, Lincoln Preparatory School. I rise primarily to support the recommendations as they were presented at the Teacher Leader Summit. I was present at the explanation of it, and what I found was that, with all due respect, most of the opposition that I hear regarding the recommendations are arguing for status quo. And this is what status quo looks like. In Louisiana, 42% of black students graduate with no post-secondary credentials, while that's true for only 25% of white students. Overall, 32% of students in Louisiana graduate with no post-secondary credential, but that's 42% for black students and 43.9% for economically disadvantaged students. In the parish where I reside, only 20% of white students graduate with no credential, and 69.3% of black students graduate with no credential. But all 3 high schools are rated as A schools. In one school, 58% of white students and 75% of black students graduate from high school with no post-secondary credential whatsoever, and that school is an A school. Unfortunately, when it comes to post-secondary readiness, failing to adopt these more stringent standards will continue to harm students of color and harm students with disabilities. Now, there is one area that I do take issue with, and we talked about this many times with regard to the proposed standard. And I want to make it clear that my problem with revision to an ACT-only regime for college readiness is not because the test is flawed, and it is. It's not because the test was developed to keep black students out of white schools, and it was. My problem is not that. The problem is, unless there is another way to measure college readiness in our system, Many schools will make the choice to simply move black and brown kids off the Tufts University diploma track. Now, I know many of you will say that only a parent can do that, but I have provided evidence to the Department of Education that schools in my area move black kids off of the Tufts University diploma track regardless of what their parents say on their IGP. And there is nothing that the LDOE can do about it, and there's nothing that you can do about it. Because the only levers that you have to affect a local school district are accountability and graduation. And so I ask you to continue to move forward, continue to work, continue to listen, but make sure that whatever policy we enact, whatever policy we put in place, does not continue the unintended consequences of continuing to treat kids differently and allowing school systems to treat kids differently based upon the way they look or the disabilities they have or how much money their families make. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Mr. Jones?
Sheldon Jones, Superintendent of Richmond Parish. I'd like to begin by first thanking the study group for all of its time and all of its efforts throughout the accountability conversation. I've been fortunate enough to attend all 5 of the public meetings that we're able to get in here. It's been weary. I've truly learned a greater appreciation for the terms coarse versus granular. The conversations have been very in-depth. I think that we should publicly acknowledge all the hard work and the effort of the study group. It brings to light a conversation that I think is true to every school system as far as its operations and its goals are concerned. It is accountability. As superintendents, we do support accountability of our school system. It would take much longer than 5 minutes to talk about the entire proposal, so I'll talk about thoughts in general. As it pertains to many challenges that are associated with accountability, I think we should first acknowledge the fact that the Department of Education and DESE worked collaboratively together to develop an accountability plan that was submitted in 2017, as I appreciate it. This conversation speaks to the fact that we missed the mark with the plan that was submitted. And I respectfully ask that if we missed the mark with the submission of the plan in 2017, that we should be careful and intentional as far as it pertains to our time for conversation to ensure that we don't miss the mark yet another time and find ourselves back at the table again having this kind of conversation. My thoughts speak very much to what Superintendent Kennedy just shared with you. I think we need to be very intentional as far as devoting time for conversation. As I've spoken with Mr. Lambert, I've differentiated between input and feedback. Generally speaking, feedback means you want to hear what I'm thinking, but it's not really going to change anything. Input, however, means that while you may not do what I suggest, at least there's a possibility that you might consider the thoughts that I'm bringing to the table. I do hope that as we move forward with these conversations, that we'll give a significant amount of time to true, meaningful input, and then we'll be able to come up with something that works best for our schools and for our students. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, sir. Members, any additional comments? Mr. Garber.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Lambert to come up and clarify what I think is a misconception, but let's wait and see. It was stated by one of the speakers that under the proposal, a school that gets a child to graduation to get a diploma would get 0 credit for that. My understanding is that there were 2 sections in the old system or the current system where you can get credit for having a child achieve a diploma, and the current proposal removes the credit from one section but keeps it in another section. Is that right?
That's correct.
So under the proposal that's on the table or that's being discussed, schools do get credit for achieving just a plain basic diploma for a child, contrary to what I thought was stated earlier, that's right.
Currently, they get an A for about 50% of the formula, and under the simulation that we ran, they get an A for 20% of the formula, and then the other 20% is based off of college and career acceleration related to high-quality credentials that they get, whether those be academic credentials or career credentials.
But bottom line, there is some credit given to the high school diploma with the current proposal.
There's a full index dedicated to that.
But so, and that applies equally to the four-year graduation rate or a student such as Superintendent Kennedy described, which is one that did not graduate in 4 years and came back after that date.
Currently, our accountability formula provides some number of incentive points when a fifth-year graduate comes through. That is something that we've heard as feedback and anticipate including as suggestions for the workers.
So he's correct that it's not in the current thing in our book right now that we're presenting.
That's
Except
right.
not, so Superintendent Kennedy was accurate about the student that he described.
That's correct.
Right, okay.
We also have noted in the feedback and in the next steps specific student populations that we want to dig more closely into. This is an overall suggestion for the accountability formula. There's of course always places where there are very specific student groups. For example, students that are on the Law 1 graduation pathway, we're going to have to work with stakeholders that specialize in this very specific special needs population to determine what types of credentials are actually going to be very meaningful for those young people who have very different outcomes when they exit high school.
But I would venture to say on that particular issue, and I'd like to just talk a little bit about some of the others, that the cohort grad rate is what we're talking about, it is 20% of proposed formula. But on the other indicator of strength of my diploma, we worried about double counting it. But in actuality, what we're doing is giving it a negative rating by giving it 0 points. So when you give every child who's in that category 0 points to counteract that, how many hundreds, 125s do you need to counteract 0? So while there is some consideration of how to make some of these adjustments, and maybe there should be some consideration, I would venture to say that we should not make it negative in the index. So double counting it is one thing, but awarding it 0 and making it a negative score really is a totally different way of looking at it. Now, my other just general comments, because I'm not going to get into the weeds with all of this, because I could for hours, but not at this point. As somebody had pointed out, I don't know if it was Dr. Wilkie or it was John Barnes or whatever, the one about college and career readiness in alignment with 3 to 8, I think it's Dr. Wilkie. It was never, when you say alignment with 3 to 8, you're looking at goals for K to 8 schools versus what high schools should be doing. The whole accountability formula in K to 8 has always been dependent upon the assessment and to some degree growth, how we considered program. And that was it. We added in a little interest and opportunities, but that was pretty much it. When looking originally at high school, that was never, and I've been around 50 plus years and been through all the iterations of this accountability, it was never, in my, at least what I was hearing and participating in, never was a goal that it should be in alignment with 3 to 8, because the missions of the two are very different. So alignment with 3 to 8, I'm not even sure if you mean in terms of standards and goals, or you just mean in terms of results. And if you mean in terms of results, it's a very dangerous to me position to take. Because what we should be setting up is what are the goals, and in any kind of criterion reference setting, you're hoping that that goal is going to be attainable by the vast majority of the participants. It's not a norm reference assessment or testing where you're trying to distribute equally among the old bell curve when you're norming a test. These are criterion reference criteria that you're hoping all will achieve. So to me, we should not be looking at a distribution along the bell curve. We should be looking at what are the goals, what are our expectations for the high school experience, and then hoping that we're going to get the majority of the schools in the state to begin to inch up and meet those goals, so that we're all going to have, or we are going to have, a higher distribution of good things, as opposed to, well, let's depress and let's set up with the idea it should come out to a bell curve, because that's not what criterion reference testing is all about. That's normal. The growth piece to this that I'm really concerned about is when we look at this, all our assessments, and I don't know the right psychometric terms to use here, but all our assessments vertically aligned in terms of scaled scores that we're so heavily dependent upon. And I really question that, because I don't think there is that vertical alignment, simply because one year we come out and say, oh, and I'm going to make this up, the fifth graders at the state level this year made this vast improvement and scored really high. And oh God, next year the sixth grade, they kind of went down, same cohort of kids. I think it had something to do with the assessment and how the cutoff scores are warranted. So do we have vertical alignment? When we look at growth, I don't want to see schools rewarded for negative growth. If you can convince me that the vertical alignment on the growth and the scaled scores is statistically sound, and I'm not convinced of that, because I've had discussions with young people who said they're not. So if they're not, that was the whole purpose in the very beginning of setting this up with that step 2 of VAM. How did you do compared to comparable kids? That's what step 2 of growth was all about originally, because you didn't have that really vertical alignment that was statistically significant. So you took groups of kids to see, did they make more growth than what that average was? Now, I don't pretend to be smart enough and well-versed enough in how to construct something that is meaningful. I also don't want to give reward for negative growth. But we have to be really sure what we mean by negative growth. We need to take a look and have some people come in and tell us assessment-wise, aren't we vertically aligned? Can we say if a kid scored, I don't know, a 5.22 one year, and then he scored a scaled score of a 5.25 the next year, did he really grow? Or was it a consequence of the test he took from one year to the other? And those are questions that you can't just gloss over and say, okay, now we're going to set it up that way, without getting any real discussion from people who are more expert at this than I am. But then to look at the high school piece and say we're going to align with these basic assessment and growth in terms of outcome, to me is a false premise to begin with. What we should be doing is saying, what do we expect the high school to look like? What is their mission? Taking every kid in who arrives at their doorstep at the 9th grade, wherever they are. We're trying to do it in elementary by saying, if you arrive in kindergarten with this, we want to put more emphasis, on the growth. We look at the high school, the renewed emphasis on the Leap 2025, which we had major discussions within the superintendent's group and with the department at one time of lessening that. Because how do you do growth from algebra to geometry? You could have so many, the standards are so different. How do you measure if that's true growth? Those are the kinds of things that I don't think has had a full exploration and discussion. And I'm extremely concerned with the strength of diploma index that I'm looking at our special ed population, especially the kids that we call the April Dunn kids. These are not fall 1 kids with significant disabilities. These are the April Dunn kids, I'm sorry. The April Dunn kids who legislatively, or we graduate them without them passing any of the end of course assessments. We accommodate them in different ways and have different goals and objectives. And when I look at our strength of diploma index, I look at those kids, they're gonna all be zeros in this thing. If they've got to, well, the vast majority, if they're truly taking a dual enrollment or advanced placement class or dual enrollment that is of the rigor that it should be at the college level, and these kids are not even able to score above an unsatisfactory on the 2025. Where is their pathway? And are they going to be able to pass an advanced industry-based certification the way we had it set up and we just did all these pathways? So where is the pathway for those kids that we can celebrate and say this school did a magnificent job because they provided the opportunities for these children to maximize their potential, and here's their pathway that they're going to be. And the ELL kids that come in as teenagers with no language skills and look at these, so where's their pathway? So to say that we're going to have some input by some different groups next month and whatever, and then possibly look at this in August, I am really concerned that we can really explore and answer these questions, among others that I have, in that amount of time, and really do a good job. You know, Superintendent Chuck Jones just said, let's not rush to do something and maybe not get it right now. Let's take a little bit more time and let's get it right. No one is saying there does not have to be some change. But what I have seen in terms of proposals to me indicate that it is not thoroughly thought out, not addressed, and not applicable to all things. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Superintendent. Mr. Lambert, just briefly speaking to Superintendent Dorsey's comment, I know that you and I have had some detailed conversation. It's about accurate growth assessment, raw growth assessment, how to assess it. The terms I understand now, as I've been educated in the process, is vertical growth. And I know you and I have had some extensive conversations about that with third-party subject matter experts. So could maybe just share a couple of comments about that, just to give the board some sense that that is being worked and that there is a focus in that area.
Yeah, the recommendation around growth actually is specific to this entire conversation around going to a third-party expert. That's the individual I mentioned related to our TAC, who knows our assessment, who can work with us to figure out exactly what the right path forward is. There's additionally a recommendation in the long run to get us to a vertical scale so that we can be very confident in that and get away from, should the board wish in the future, from a value-added based assessment and instead go to an assessment that is more closely aligned to a vertical approach, that is scale score comparison. On the strength of diploma, I'm going through all of your comments and just picking which components I think I can respond to really clearly. On the strength of diploma for all students, I think the proposal is actually pretty well thought out. The proposal includes a growth component inside of the strength of diploma. While not specific to April Dunn students would fall into the category of students who entered from 8th grade below basic and would then receive a floor number of points within that strength of diploma component. I think that we can have a conversation with superintendents around, are those enough points? What are the right credentials for young people that enter high school below basic without basic literacy and numeracy skills? But I do think that the proposal that the study group has considered and discussed does take into account a lot of student populations, including English language learners and students with disabilities.
You had told me that you were proposing to give them a basic.
That's what's in the proposal currently. Well, I think the question is, and I'd love to engage with you more on this.
So maybe we need to do that later, because that particular along with the others are going to take a lot unless we take another hour of discussion.
That's right. Mr. Chair, if I might. Just a point of a process point, and I think this is an incredibly rich discussion. This is exactly why the next step is engagement. I think Superintendent Boyer has raised any number of important issues that would likely be critical to discussing, understanding, and ultimately resolving between now and August. And again, a reminder to this board, if August is what initially the department recommended, if that needs to be amended, then essentially that's what the department, I imagine, would do. I think that the question for Dr. Blumley that I have is, in light of the next step being engagement, right? What do you believe it will, how optimistic are you that those conversations will yield and mind these kinds of concerns that have come up and help to resolve them?
I mean, I don't know the answer to the question because we haven't had the conversation to that degree, which I think is the whole point of the next phase of the process. I think what I'm hearing you say, Ms. Orange-Jones, is that if in August we feel like we're not there,
and you'll say that,
we'll just say we're not there. But the original motion that was approved required that we all come back by no later than August of '22 with a set of proposals. But it could be that what we come back with in August of '22 is we're almost there, we need to extend for another period of time.
Okay.
And I haven't heard anyone say that that wouldn't be acceptable to them.
I haven't either. Thank you.
Good discussion, then. Was any other comments? No more comment cards. Motion on the floor is to accept the exceptions. Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
That concludes your agenda.